Okay. All right. So, Berto and I just recorded the beginning of an episode on toxic masculinity,
in which we got very toxic masculine.
literally a half an hour about. Berto and I got so angry at each other and so toxic masculine with each other and literally fighting. And it wasn't bad. I mean, it was just, I didn't feel threatened by you, Berto. And we've been in, debates. It didn't feel like the finger in the face.
No, there was no finger in face. No.
It didn't have that energy.
No.
I was getting increasingly frustrated, and I thought, I just scrapped the whole episode, and then we continued talking about it. And then I started to cry a little bit and say, I'm frustrated. I don't know what to do here. I want my normal best friend podcasting vibe. And then you started to cry too.
Yes.
And I might really, really cry. It's just ironic that in an episode on toxic masculinity that we start the episode by crying. I love you. You're my brother from another mother.
I love you. You're my brother from another mother.
And I don't like to fight with you. And I respect your brain. I respect your wisdom. But you were effing annoying when we recorded this episode at first. So let's start over, Berto. What do you say?
Let's do it.
This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk and Humberto. I'm a therapist and a professor. Who are you, Berto?
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I think I still grow corn with genetic defects in it.
So, Berto, quick questions, quick answers. What is masculinity?
It is the set of traits that are part of being a male of the species.
What's toxic masculinity?
It's when those traits get out of hand and you can hurt yourself or others.
What is positive masculinity?
When you leverage the traits to make yourself or others better.
What are the consequences of toxic masculinity?
It can include ostracizing members of society, hurting them, violence against women and others.
What do conservatives say about the concept of toxic masculinity?
Many probably believe it's stupid.
What problems do feminists blame on toxic masculinity?
Things like abuse, rape, harassment.
What's one example of toxic masculinity in TV and movies?
Gordon Gekko in Wall Street. Greed is good. You should crush your enemies. See him driven before you.
What about positive masculinity from movie and TVs?
Like Jerry Maguire, top hotshot agent, but yet, masculine dude. But at the same time, he has a sensitive side, and he falls in love with a gal and her son, and is a good parent role model for him.
Yeah. Did I say TVs? That was weird. What should we do, you and I, about all this stuff?
We should make sure we understand what we mean by it, and we should set a good example.
Well, that's what we're going to talk about today in detail, all these things. I got a lot of notes on toxic masculinity. I looked up various different definitions. Some I resonated with, others not so much. Most of them I did not because I found them to be a little too specific. But first, Berto, I've already asked you this in the previous recording when we scrapped it, but you can just answer the same way that you answered last time. When did the term first emerge in our culture?
70s?
Close, 1980s. And who do you think it emerged from? What sort of groups?
I would imagine it was like second wave feminists.
It was not. It was within men's groups at the time in the 80s. Yeah.
Like supporting each other, like men's groups?
Yeah, like men evaluating how gender socialization has harmed men.
Like MITGO groups, incel groups?
Yeah. So my definition, just boiling all the different concepts into 3 words, is harmful masculine norms. So harmful meaning harmful to the self or others, or as at a societal level, or the environment, I suppose. Masculine meaning associations with men, and norms meaning the norms that we teach people. Like it is the norm to say thank you when someone gives you something, or please when you're asking. These are norms that we teach people, and we teach norms associated with masculinity, and some of those are harmful. What toxic masculinity is not is anti-male, which some people will say. What do you think the internet and the incel people think about the discourse around toxic masculinity being anti-men? What do you think, Berto?
Yeah, I think so I personally don't love the term because it's got the word masculine in it. And so it already, I think, sets some people against it for the wrong reasons, because they hear toxic masculinity and they're like, oh, it's against men. And it sort of is, because we're the ones in charge and we're the ones with all the power historically. So yeah, but I would like to think that they're being a little misguided about that aspect. In general, they then go all the way to the other side and they're like, they want to eliminate male and men and make us little feebles.
Right. And it's similar to the word feminism, right? That some men mistake feminism for being women are better, for example,
right.
Or let's exclude men.
Or Black Lives Matter means, now they only care about Black lives.
Right. No, that's not what it's saying. It's interesting, I think, that a lot of men have trouble with just the word feminism. Like, it kind of proves the point that you can't say I'm a feminist because it has fem in it, which is associated with women. You know, I just find it just another example of sexism and misogyny in our culture. But anyway, so just getting to what someone said on the internet about this. Feminism and the discourse around toxic masculinity is not about equality. It's always been about retribution. They want women to have 100% authority and 0% responsibility, and men to have 100% responsibility and 0% authority. And it's working well. Women can put men in jail for any reason with no evidence. Berto, what do you think they mean by that? Women could put men in jail for any reason with no evidence.
And I think they're talking about the whole, you could sue for alimony payments, or you could say, hey, that person looked at me funny, so then they get put away for life.
Right. And that's what the red pill, the incel, and the MGTOW people. Yeah. Are there examples of that? Yeah. There are examples of women accusing men of things that were false and putting them in jail for, decades for things that they didn't do. But that is not the norm. It's not a very typical thing. And
I find it incredibly ironic that these men are using these grievances, like, we are oppressed, we are this defenseless people being hurt by all these women, when they themselves would look at that and be like, oh, that's not a very masculine trait. It's just ironic. They're like, eh.
Yeah. And whenever the privileged is challenged about their privilege, this is one of the top 5 responses. I remember, as a brown person, Berto, as a brown person in the United States, there was a tipping point in the United States when whites were less than 50% of the demographic, right? Yep. It was what was it, 10, 20 years ago or something? And there was this utter panic, oh my God, or a war against Christmas when when Christianity is only 75% adhered to in the United States instead of 90%, that suddenly it's we're oppressed. It's how is 75% or how is 49.5% of the population suddenly a minority? The rest of the minorities are in a bunch of little groups, you understand?
Right.
There's not a lot of half Japanese, half white people in the United States, you know what I mean? So when men are challenged about their privilege, but I get it, it feels, because relative to the power they had 20, 40 years ago, it's a loss of power.
Yeah.
And so you only feel the deficit, right? It's sort of like in physics or in biology, when you have a super cold hand and you put your hand in lukewarm water, it feels hot, but it's actually lukewarm. You know what I mean? So I think that's what's happening. And all you got to do is take your head out of your ass and look around and go, oh, actually, I'm being brought down to normal levels of power instead of the astronomical levels of power I had before.
Or you could be like Paul Atreides and keep your hand in the water.
The other thing that they think feminism and the discourse around toxic masculinity is doing is making men into women.
Right.
What do you think this is about, Berto?
Yeah, basically, it's like this self-fulfilling narrative of, okay, they want us to not be so male. And they don't define what they mean, because if they did, it gets a more awkward conversation. Because if they define it to they want us to not hit them and abuse them and rape them, right? All of a sudden you're like, well, yeah, maybe we shouldn't do that. But instead it's they want us to not be male, so they want us to become female.
Right. And that's not what the discourse around toxic masculinity is about. And that's why I want, as 2 men who I would say we're actually fairly masculine presenting. I definitely am not all the traits, but
Yep.
captain of the football team, I stand tall, I talk loud, I like to be in charge,
That's right.
say what I want to say, I get angry, not that women can, and I want to say that from the beginning is all the things we're talking about does not exclude women. Anyone can be anything they want. That's kind of the point, but there are socializations that we give people. And what I also say from the beginning is that who knows where we'll be in 50 years, but right now we're at a place where people can identify of various different genders, right? Yeah. And I like to identify as a man. Like it feels congruent to me for the most part. Like,
dude, I'm super like male. Like, look, I drink chocolate martinis, dance salsa, sing at karaoke all the time.
Salsa in your neck of the woods was very...
It's actually very sexist.
It's very masculine, right?
It's both. It's actually... I will say dancing in Colombia is actually a fairly equitable thing. Surprisingly, because you think, the male leads, but it's not real. Like, both partners are supposed to be really good at it and in charge, both of them.
So we have a quote here from the internet. "We need to eradicate toxic masculinity," is what they always scream. Well, it now seems they are realizing the consequences of trying to turn men more feminine. Shouldn't have tried to create so many femboys if you don't really want sensitive men. So yeah, there's so many weird things in here. Like one, trying to tell boys and men to sift through masculine traits and discard the negative ones and hold on to the neutral and positive ones is not turning men more feminine. Right. It's just asking people, men in particular, and by extension everyone really, to evaluate how they've been socialized and what part of those socializations are negative and which ones are not, right. and discard the ones that are negative. And since men have been in so much power over so long and still have a lot of power, our toxic traits cause so much more damage is the thing. The other thing that they will say is that it's a conspiracy against men. For example, one person says on the internet, "Feminism is the prime weapon of the communists." What do you think about that, Berto?
I know of very few female leaders of communist countries, number one. Number two, I don't understand what it has to do with it. Like, because even if you were being very academic about it, which I doubt that we are being academic in these contexts, the communism thing is supposed to be like, okay, we get through these periods of strife, and at the other side, everyone is equal. So I guess if everyone is equal, they see that as feminization. Maybe that's what they're talking about. If everyone's equal, then we're all just feminine.
Right. And maybe on that point, it's not about erasing your personality differences. Like, I like to go fishing, or I like to always be the one driving the car if I had a choice, if other people would be cool with it. Or I like to stay home with the kids. Like, it's not about erasing preferences or life choices. It's about giving people the flexibility, regardless of what they are, who they are, what gender they are, to be able to choose for themselves without outside influence, without outside ideas about who should be this and who should be that.
Absolutely. And then I would even just, like, if I could only die on one hill here, it would be like, well, fine, I'll even leave that fight for another day. Can we at least not hurt, abuse, harass, from these positions of power? And because the thing that gets lost in this argument, they're trying to, again, if those discussions were being had with the definition of what we're talking about, like, they just don't want us to grab their tits at work and insult them and slap their ass and then go in the back room and rape them, all of a sudden that conversation gets a lot more difficult to have and awkward. Instead, they hide all that aside. They put all that aside and they say, they just want us to cry more at movies.
All right.
It's like, wait, like that's level 59 after like the first 6,000 levels.
Well, or even more ridiculous, they're just like, they want us to be submissive. They want us to give them power. They want us to let them walk all over us,
right.
Which is like, how did you get there? From us talking about socializing boys into believing that emotions are not okay, how did you make the leap into saying we're trying to tell men that they should let women walk all over them, and that women should be able to put men in jail for no reason. Like, how did you make that leap?
Well, and there's also this very confusing thing that happens, which is that on the one hand, they say, oh, women, they go around pretending they want like a sensitive guy and someone who cares about them, but then they go out with the assholes.
Right.
Implication being, I'm not an asshole, and I'm sad because women are not going out with me. But in the next breath, they'll say, but they're trying to turn us not into assholes.
Right. It's such a weird narrative and ideology that is in the Incel and MGTOW and pickup artist community. That whole thing is like, and I've had we've talked about this before. I've had clients who told me all about it, and I was just like, how in the world did you download that weird, rigid narrative into your mind? And it's so prevalent. And we've gone into that discussion. Maybe we'll get into it later, but just let it be known that there's a lot of, it's sort of like how there are pockets in white supremacy, severe white supremacy, who would call themselves white supremacists, I suppose, where they develop very weird ideologies, like that they're the superior race, right, or that, I don't know, I could go on and on, but I think it's
pockets within pockets.
Yeah. And on the bright side that I look on, it's that when we see that happening, the incel community, for example, that would never have existed 50 years ago because we didn't need it 50 years ago.
Absolutely. And I will say that there's another aspect here that we shouldn't just talk about that incel MGTOW thing, because there's a whole other side who would absolutely not categorize themselves as incels or MGTOWs or anything like that, but that they believe that men should be hyper aggressive.
Totally.
They should be in the boardrooms only, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, women are too emotional. I mean, I remember when Mondale and Ferraro were running for president and vice president, a woman running for vice president. A lot of people forget that happened in the 80s, way back then. And
she was the VP candidate?
Yeah, Ferraro. Everyone talked about, well, what if Mondale dies and she becomes president? Women, what about when they're on their period?
Right.
They're too emotional. She's gonna press the button and nuke the USSR. And that was told to me unironically in the 80s. That was said to me as if, well, that's a fact. And I don't remember specifically, but I bet you many women believe that to be true as well, because they were, they had internalized sexism. And so anyway, the other idea that people will say is that the discussion of toxic masculinity condemns masculinity in general, which is not true. We've already covered that. Also, what some people will say, which is actually kind of true, is that the discourse around toxic masculinity lets men off the hook, because then men can just blame socialization for their bad behavior. What do you think of that, Berto? Yeah,
actually, I see this point a little bit more. In fact, part of the reason I dislike the term, because whether you think it's genetic, socialization, a mix of both or whatever, you don't want to have it be a scapegoat. Like, oh, well, yeah, I mean, that's, boys will be boys. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
And so instead, I mean, I look at it more as like, let's label something, because that way we can talk about all the bullet points under that label. But in the end, really, it's bad behaviors are the important part here. And those bad behaviors are bad because they're destructive to others and they're destructive to society. And so, no, there's no excuse.
Yeah.
It's like, same thing with like going to jail. You don't get to not go to jail just because like, you had some predisposition to something. And it's like, yeah, it's the same thing here.
Well, and that's a good example that, we could look at a criminal who murdered someone, say they held up a 7-Eleven and shot the guy because they were just wanted to get the money. You wouldn't say, you can't as a criminal say, well, I had a bad childhood.
I was socialized this way.
Yeah, or I was socialized, toxic masculinity, or my neighborhood was really tough. We wouldn't say that, okay, well, then you now can escape the law. But at the same time, societally, and if we're going to fix the prevalence of these kinds of behaviors, addressing these factors is extremely important and probably the most useful. I mean, just yelling at people and putting them in prison clearly does not deter people from committing crimes.
Absolutely. And I think that is why it's important not to lose that in this conversation, which of course neither you or I are doing. But if someone out there is, quote unquote, yelling at men, I think that's the wrong approach as well.
Right.
Now, there's times to yell at certain men when they do certain egregious things, for sure. But like with the robber example, what we do, or what we should do, I should say, we're terrible at this in society. What we should do is say, absolutely, Mr. Robber, you are right. We have failed you as a society. Right. Unfortunately, you still have to pay some consequences. But we're working hard to fix society so there's less of your situation.
Right. And 99% of the people that went through the same circumstances did not kill a guy the same way.
Exactly, yeah.
But they were factors in that.
They were factors, yeah.
Okay, Berto, let's talk about toxic traits and positive traits of masculinity. Let's start with toxic traits. Berto, lay it on me.
All right, toxic traits, I think hyperaggression.
Okay, tell me, how are we socialized? Maybe not you and I, but like boys in general.
No, I think, well, I was certainly, look, I grew up, and we all grew up watching, like, what we do is we go fight.
Arnold
We're gonna
Schwarzenegger.
kill him.
Yeah.
We're going to take revenge. We're going to load up on all our guns, and God damn it. Now, what else?
It was rarely women that were in those depictions.
Well, and I'd say even when there were women, it was, I guess I would say, a little bit masculinized in a sense, right? Like Sigourney Weaver, grabs all the guns and she's going to go kick ass. Right. Now, there are two aspects to it. One is like, we did see that it was like usually the underdog that gets that. But the bigger message was, we are supposed to be fighting. We're supposed to be at war. We're supposed to be killing each other.
Yeah.
And in all metaphors of it, right? In the boardroom and
yeah. And to avoid that, when the need arises or when faced with that as a option, makes you not a man.
Right.
Makes you not a good enough man. Like if you're a good enough man, you will rise to the occasion with ultra violence,
Yeah. And look, so it was impossible in history to survive, sadly, sitting there being nice to people, because they would come, raid your village, try to kill everyone. But now we don't live in that situation.
Yeah.
So this is the time to have these conversations.
Yeah.
We don't have to go out and kill each other.
Right. As an example of this, I thought about this moment that was, I don't know, would have been like 25 years ago. I was in my mid-20s, and I'm at a bar with all my buddies. You know some of them, Berto. And there was probably like, no joke, like 25 of us at Goldie's on 45th, next to the old Guild 45th.
Oh, yeah.
Movie theater. Anyway, where we saw Darjeeling Limited one time.
Yes.
Anyway, I used to live nearby there, and I was in there with like 20, 25 of my friends, and these are fraternity brothers of mine, and I mean, we were the nerd frat, so we weren't like large, but we definitely would get in fights with other frats sometimes. Mm-hmm. We were used to, as a group, fighting other people, and
boys will be boys.
Right. And you can't be, do they say simped? Is that a thing, to be simped? Or to be a simp on the internet?
Oh, yeah, simp. Yes, I've heard that.
Like you're submissive, or
Yes, that's
anyway. Like, right. So we're at this bar, and I went there for a while. I went there every Thursday night, like with my friends, and we were playing pool, and we would always play pool. And there was a whole system. I don't know if in other towns would do this, but you put a quarter up to claim the next game, and it was all honor system. So if there were 4 other quarters on the pool table and you put your quarter, you just kind of know, well, I must be 5th in line there somewhere.
Yeah.
And as the quarter owner, you kind of have to keep an eye on the pool table to see like when your number comes up. Yeah. And so there was this group of guys playing at the 2 pool tables, and I put my quarter up, and then a while in, I noticed they hadn't come over to talk with me, and it was the same guys, which was weird. They
just kept playing.
Yeah, they just kept playing, and so I went over there and politely said something like, "I think I must be next or something,"
Mm-hmm.
even though I thought they already passed me over. And they're like, "Oh yeah, whatever." And I'm like, "Okay, well, I think I'm next, because it's been a while since I put my quarter on here." And they're like, "Okay, whatever." And I leave, and I figure, well, now they can't like not honor the honor system here,
Yeah.
And so they, I'm keeping an eye, and I see the game ends, and I'm just kind of waiting, and they say nothing, and they just start again.
Oh my God.
And so I'm like, okay, and then I went over there a while later. I said, so I'm pretty sure I'm next. So I
gave them plenty of outs.
Gave them plenty of outs. I don't want to get in a fight. Why would I want that? And then, more beers in, hanging out with my friends. I'm starting to kind of tell my other friends, like, hey, those guys are being dicks about it. I go over there and like a couple more times, and I'm like, look, we're next. So after this game, before I finish my sentence, he just starts screaming in my ear, like a centimeter away from my face, just screaming at me. You better effing, I'm gonna kick your F and blah blah. I'm just reminded of that one scene from It's Always Sunny where Charlie Day is like, all right, well, go ahead and F yourself in the B and F your A and and Mac's like, did he just say C? And Dennis is like, yeah, don't even
try to unpack it.
But so he's screaming at me, and now the entire bar, which is dozens of people, are just looking at this large guy screaming, and I'm not small, and he's screaming in my ear. And I remember looking around because that's my response when stuff like this happens, is I get super calm.
Yeah.
I just kind of started looking around, like kind of rolling my eyes, like, look at this guy. And so I walk away and I am seething.
Of course.
And at this point, God. So logically, from a non-emotional and non-toxic masculine, or even any kind of masculine standpoint, I guess I'm just not playing pool tonight. I don't care. I don't need to play pool.
Right.
You know what I mean? I'm hanging with my friends. There's dartboards.
There's clearly something wrong with this dude.
Yeah, there's something wrong with something's up with that guy and his friends, but particularly that guy. And I can only lose, if I fight him, that's only what, like, and then I get to play pool because I risked life and limb for everyone. I risk going to prison. You know what I mean?
And then you get to play pool.
Yeah, just because I play pool all the time. I don't care, and it's I'm not here to do that necessarily. The only reason why I would go over there is for what, Berto?
For your honor, the masculine honor.
Masculine honor.
You don't want people to think that you're a pussy,
right?
Which is what? It's a female body part.
Exactly. You don't want to be a girl.
You don't. Not even a girl. A female. A part of a female.
Right. So you're going to be a man. You're going to stand. You're going to have balls. All these words. You're not going to be a pussy. You're going to have
dick
balls.
Energy.
Right. By the way, trigger alert, trigger warning for everyone on various levels. And I sat there and I did a political campaign with all my buddies of just like, now is the time. We are going to go over there and we are going to rock them. He thought I was alone. I'm here with 25 of my frat brothers. That guy is going to get dragged outside and beaten. We're going to beat all 5 of those dudes into the ground. We're going to take him out. I'm going to drag him outside, and we're all just going to wail on these guys. And then we're going to find their cars and we're going to smash their... I was...
Yes, Your Honor. I did key their car after beating them. Yes.
Long story short, there was a couple scuffles. It didn't amount to anything. And this is 25 years ago. And this moment is burnt in my brain.
Right.
Because of the adrenaline, because of the honor, the toxic masculine ideas in my head of you cannot be, baited like that.
Right,
you can't be made into a simp like that. You cannot be overpowered and all he did was present himself as a very unreasonable, weird person who was extremely territorial about a goddamn pool table in a public bar. You know what I mean? Like, he's the one that made a fool out of himself. But because he screamed at me and he dominated me verbally, and I never dominated him verbally or physically.
Right.
And he dominated the pool table, because that happened, it is a lightning bolt of pain and shame through my masculinity.
The gorilla, the silverback gorilla.
It's just ridiculous.
Well, So we might disagree on this point, but I do believe that there are some learned behaviors from millions of years there as well. Flight or flight. You know?
Sure. Did we evolve a mechanism as humans to protect our territory from other hunter-gatherers? Could be. You know, it seems likely.
And not just humans.
And
like
we see it
animals.
even with chimps and bonobos. They will, when they encounter another, which are our closest cousins, it's impossible to know if they have a similar culture. But when they encounter similar tribes, there's usually a posturing of, hey, you know, get away. This is our territory. And then if that doesn't work, then sometimes violence occurs. And even when it's violent, it's like short bursts, hoping that it's like, you know, because there's this tension between I want to destroy you, but I also don't want to risk destroying me. And so genetically and, you know, psychologically, but yeah, so, you know, are humans from that likely? Were men given a little bit more of the oomph around that? You know, maybe.
Well, I mean, I was just watching a documentary about Aborigines in Tanzania, and they still hunt every day, right? So like their whole life is hunt. That's it. The males hunt, and in this case, they're running out of things to hunt, so now they're hunting baboons. And dude, it's like kind of humans going against other primates, and it's very vicious and brutal. But they're not doing it in a sort of in a mean, evil way. They're just like, we need food. But they kill them, and they have to watch that they don't get killed and hurt. And so they're playing that out every day, where we have turned it into these weird, like pool tables. No one has to survive over pool tables.
No.
Like, what the hell? So for animals, it's just a matter. It's a daily life, right? I have to eat here, protect this, that. For us, we have so much culture, so many metaphors in our lives, and then we don't even know what to do with all these remnants from before.
Yeah.
You
well,
know?
and anyway, point is that if I were my wife, Stacy, who is socialized as a girl, because you know she was, you know, identified as a girl growing up, that she in that situation, I guarantee you, would have reacted completely differently, and wouldn't have remembered it as well, because it wouldn't shame her sense of self-worth in that moment. You know, for her, if she were in that situation, she would have, you know, gone over there, put her quarter down, and then maybe asked nicer, you know, because that's the other thing. I probably wasn't super nice when I walked over there, you know, but who knows? And then if there was any resistance, she would have just given up. She'd be like, well, I guess we're not playing pool. And if I were standing next to her, I'd be like, well, that's a bunch of bull crap. You know what I mean? And how is that different? Is that because of genetics? You know, hard to know. We definitely know it's a part of socialization, that I was taught that to be a proper man, you know, and the more I get into the discourse around gender socialization, toxic masculinity, part of it, the more I'm like, oh yeah. I mean, there's these rules that are passed down to boys, and you were raised mostly in Bogota, but you know, partially in the States as well. And but I can speak for me, is that like one idea that really resonated with me, that's a toxic masculine idea, which is that if anything you do is associated, or you're accused of anything that's associated with a woman or a gay person, then you are not a man and you're a terrible human being. You know, like there is something deeply wrong with you.
Yep.
If you exhibit anything that could be mistaken for a woman. There
right.
is deeply something wrong with you.
That's
right. And gay would, you know, because back in the old day, we thought gay people were just women. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, absolutely. So me and my friends, absolutely. When I was growing up in Colombia, if you wore or said or did something and it was like considered feminine, that was a no-go.
Right.
And you would get made fun of.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. You get targeted for bullying. You would be ostracized from your group. And then by extension, you know, when I think about all the ways in which men as groups, and I've been a part of many men groups, friends, there's a constant signaling to each other, virtue signaling, if you will, of we are men, we are not women. I am a man. Are you a man?
Right.
Like all these, and the shorthand to this, that is at least in Seattle men culture, is jokes about rape. Honestly, because for a long time I'm like, why do some people think rape is funny? Like I don't understand that.
Right.
But because it's not funny. But when I think about humor is tragedy averted, right?
Yeah.
So the pratfall, someone falls, a Wile E. Coyote runs into the cliff and blows up, but then in the next scene he's fine. He didn't actually. If Wile E. Coyote died in one of those scenes and was just like didn't go to the afterlife, it wouldn't be funny. It'd just be like, well, that's just tragedy. Yeah. But tragedy averted is a bunch of guys talking about raping women and joking about it. And it's tragedy averted because you're talking about it and no one can get you in trouble because you're amongst men.
Right.
And you're amongst bros who understand that we all agree that we're better than women, that we're not going to really rape them, but we know it's okay for us to talk about it. It's okay for us to assert dominance over women. It's sort of like that Key and Peele sketch where Key and Peele, they have wives and
oh yes.
They're like, she was being a bitch.
Yeah, they can't say it out loud.
Yeah.
They're trying to pretend.
Right. They're trying to signal to each other, look,
I'm in charge.
Yeah, I'm in charge. I got balls. I put my woman in my place. So when I realized that, it was kind of recently when I really kind of put these things together from feminists teaching me about this sort of thing, by the way, that I was like, oh my God, there's so much energy that men put into establishing themselves as not women and not gay. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you experience that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, like I said, it was an absolute thing that you had to signal that you're male and you had to signal that you're not all those other things. And we had people in my class and in the school that showed some of those traits. And yeah, they got made fun of and it was uncomfortable.
And that's another signaling. If you are a fifth grade boy making fun of another fifth grade boy who is feminine, by extension, right, you are masculine.
That's right.
If you're worried about, and the movie Moonlight actually portrays it. We'll talk about this a little bit later. But anyway, so other toxic masculine traits, bro. I
think the idea of boys will be boys. So basically, and especially when it comes to sexuality. So like, it's okay to go push the boundaries. In fact, the extreme of this is that we all grew up thinking that the model is they will say no. You just got to push through it.
Right.
Yeah. You would literally see that in movies. It's like, right, no, oh. And you're like, oh, I see. Okay. So they will say no. They'll resist. That's what's expected.
Right.
And then we just push through it.
Right. Because if you don't, you're not a real man.
That's right. And even more so, the internal message is procreation. You're not told this explicitly. You just like feel it. I will die. This is death. If I don't do this, I will die. Yeah. And my line will die.
The psychological urge, when the urge is raging, can be very strong, but it doesn't override our ability to go, oh, they don't want to do it. Unless you've been taught, one, you're not a real man if you don't push past that, and two, men take what they want. Real right, alpha men, they take what they want. They don't wait.
Right. And I'm not, by the way,
Arnold Schwarzenegger doesn't wait for someone to give him a bazooka and shoot it. He takes the bazooka and he shoots it.
And by the way, I wasn't even talking about the urge. I'm not talking about when you're doing the act. I'm talking about the message we grew up watching is the way you will get a woman is through these mechanisms.
Right.
And since implicitly we learned that if we don't get a woman and have children, we essentially die and everyone in our descendants dies.
Right.
I am going to die if I don't dominate women.
Right. Yeah. So other toxic masculine traits, Bruno?
Let's see. I have to. I have to be the one to explain. What do they call it?
Mansplaining.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Now this one, I know that the way I look at it is like it happens more with men because men are in charge.
Well, and men are taught to be intellectually and conversationally in charge.
At the same time, I've noticed that it's also very related to personality because
oh yeah,
men mansplain to each other based on their personality.
Well, not to mansplain to you right now, Berto, but the way that I see it is that anyone can splain regardless of gender, and you'll see it. Women will splain, meaning, and splain, means to tell someone something, sort of lecture them from a top-down position about things that they probably already know, and it's inappropriate, and it hurts the other person's feelings, and thus annoys them. To walk up to someone's pumping gas in the car, and you just walk up to you and be like, so actually, you're supposed to put the nozzle into the gas tank insertion point, and you're supposed to put the credit card. I know you didn't know this, but you're supposed to put the credit card. So anyone can do that based on personality or circumstance or something. But men are particularly prone to it because they're taught that they're supposed to be dominant, that they know more than women do. And, especially in certain topics, you're not going to see a lot of mansplaining among things that they don't associate with men. But there's this classic, someone posted on Reddit the other day that she was at like a science conference, and she's a physicist or something. I can't remember, mathematician or something. And she was in a conversation, and she was talking about her expert area. And this guy who didn't really know what she was talking about, or what he was talking about.
Book, right? Is this the one?
Yeah. he jumps in. He's like, well, actually, if you've read the book by so and so, they say da da da, and she lets him finish, and she says, yeah, that's me.
That's my book.
That's my publication, I know. And it's just a classic example of mansplaining. He's telling her something that she's a super expert on, acting like she doesn't know it. Right. That's the definition of mansplaining. And once I started to understand, now I will also say that men are sometimes accused of mansplaining when they're not mansplaining. And
so I got accused of mansplaining one time at work. And the reason is we were in a meeting, and it was a virtual meeting, and someone said, and this person was, they identify as female. She said something, and I said the classic, I think what she's trying to say is blah. Right? Yeah. Okay. Now that is a classic, like they show it in movies, they show it in things like not to do this, right? And I think afterwards, someone said, hey, you shouldn't do it. Now the catch is, I'm a narcissist. I think I can explain things better than anyone else. So I wasn't saying it because, oh, she's a woman, they won't understand her. Because actually most of the people in the meeting were actually, I think it was definitely a majority females in the meeting. So it's not like I'm like, oh, I'm explaining it to the guys because, honey, it was just like, I think probably incorrectly that I'm going to human splain. Because I think I can make more sense out of what you just said.
Well, you're helping.
I think I'm helping. And whether I was or wasn't, it wasn't coming in this instance. I'm not saying I've never done it, but in this instance, it wasn't coming from a side of like, it's because you're a woman, right? And so that happens. And like you said, all sorts of people do these kinds of things.
Well, let me ask you.
Some personalities are more prone to it.
This person that you did that for, do you think she was bothered by that?
I don't know, because it was someone else that brought it up to me.
Yeah. So we would have to ask her, because if she was like, well, he didn't really get it right, but I don't care. Or if she said, well, yeah, I mean, I was in the middle of my sentence and he just like took over the thing and he like, it kind of silenced me. Like, then that's mansplaining.
And I'll tell you what I took from it in either case. I was like, yeah, I shouldn't do that, because who am I to phrase things better than what you just said? If people didn't understand what someone said, someone will say, oh, I didn't quite get that point.
Well,
You know what I mean?
yeah, I mean, but it's not a bad impulse to be like, I sense the room is not aligning or understanding what they're saying. I think I can help. That's not terrible.
It's not terrible, but
But you might want to ask. You might want to ask, hey, would it help if or you should know the person you're splaining for, right?
That's fair. So I'll tell you what I've done since, because I literally thought about it. I was like, here's what I've done since. Whenever I feel like some point was made that's kind of getting lost or it didn't really work or whatever, I don't frame it as, I think what such and such is trying to say, right? Instead, I just make a point from my perspective at the risk that it might be redundant, but I'd rather look redundant than make someone else look bad.
Okay, yeah. Right. And other manifestations of toxic masculinity, bro.
I think certainly some really bad ones. So sexual harassment in the workplace.
Right.
And I know this can go both ways, but I'm saying the idea of men are in charge. If there are women coming to the workplace, they should, and this is how it used to be, and it's getting slowly better, but they should look pretty, and we should be able to like say anything we want to them and probably slap their ass in.
Right. And this is, I guess, more broadly, is just sexual harassment of women in various contexts, like, in public, but at work, And again, this idea of entitlement, dominance, women don't really matter. Their feelings don't really matter. They want it. Signaling to other men. The more and more I think about it, the more and more I believe that the catcalling, the sexual harassment, particularly if it's in front of other men, is performative. What do you think about that?
There is an aspect that is performative. I believe that you're right. I also think that there is an aspect that is fantasy fulfillment, because you're like, oh, I get to interact with a woman in this powerful way. What I will say though is this is one of those areas where I feel like, totally agree, the problem has been 99% on the male side because men have been in charge. But we should be wary, cautious, whatever, that as we move into the future, we don't make the mistake of thinking that all humans don't suffer from a lot of the same hangups and things. I bring this up because I was at work many, many years ago, and a female coworker was telling me about how every lunch she likes to go eat lunch at the basketball court to watch one of our male coworkers because he plays with his shirt off, and as she sits there and drools the whole time. Okay, if a male said that at the workplace these days, that would be, if anyone said that at the workplace these days. But back then, neither I nor I think anyone thought much of that comment, because it wasn't just to me, there was a room full of people. And I think part of it is because, well, she's a woman, she should be able to say that. But in reality, no, those behaviors are actually not okay in general. It's just that it happens to be that males have been the ones in charge, and predominantly, and therefore, so as we move forward, let's definitely fix the male problem, but let's all remember, power should not oppress the powerless.
Yeah, and even more micro, shouldn't do things that make other people feel uncomfortable. Yeah. If the dude playing basketball was into it, then great. They're flirting, yeah, and she likes to go, look at him with a shirt off, and he likes her looking, then 100%. But if you don't know that the target is cool with it, then you're risking putting them in a very uncomfortable place, and that's the point. The other thing is that because men have been in power, and because men are socialized particularly to do all this kind of stuff more often, if a woman were to be playing basketball and there was a guy, leering at her, there's a much bigger sense of danger there. It might not be dangerous, but the chances of it being dangerous are higher. Can a woman rape a man? Yes. So a man could absolutely be in danger if a woman were, leering at him. But on average, and especially the way it feels given the averages, gendered, it's not a equal scenario gender-wise. What I'm saying?
But at work, it's not only about the physical threat; it's the the hierarchy threat. In this case, the woman in question was a full-time employee, pretty high level, and the male was a temp employee, very low level.
I mean, if the temp feels the need to please the full-time person for their own employment safety, is that what you're saying?
Well, that, as well as like the context was a room full of people. That male employee was not in the room. This person is talking sexually about that male employee and about how this person ogles them during lunch. Yeah. And at the time, we all laughed and we thought that was hilarious.
Right. And that's not okay. Right. Yeah. It's happened to me as the target of that kind of thing. Women years and years ago would put hands on me, and I wasn't comfortable with it. I didn't feel unsafe. Because of the context that I'm in, and I guess just because of who I am and the confidence I have, I guess, in my own physical abilities, I suppose. But I did remember feeling like, this is not okay. We work together and you're my boss, and you're a woman putting hands on me in ways that I didn't consent to. And so, that certainly can happen. But the toxic masculine aspects of this is that men are taught that they're supposed to do this and they have the right to do it. Does that mean that women don't do it? No. Women, people in power will do bad things all the time. Being a womanizer is another toxic, I think it's kind of particular, but being able to bag the babe, and score with as many chicks as possible was definitely a message I was taught growing up. Were you taught that?
Oh, yeah, that's everywhere, again, in media and history, everywhere.
Yeah.
That is definitely the goal.
Yeah. You're a real man.
Absolutely.
If you can.
And again, things have definitely been changing, but I'm saying as we grew up and even into recent memory, women are supposed to be virgins.
Right. Yeah. To address that, things are changing for the better in a lot of ways regarding gender. And some young people might be listening and it's just like, well, it wasn't really like that for me. And, God bless you, I'm happy. And that's, partly, if not completely, a result of us having these conversations, one, and evaluating it, doing research, blah, 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 speaking out, picketing. But the other thing I'll say is that it's become more subtle in today's, at least, suburban, mainstream American society.
Right.
When we were kids, it was very overt. If I remember when I was a kid, there was this film that we would always watch called Free to Be You and Me. And it was about a lot of things, about racism and also about toxic masculinity to some extent. There was a whole segment on a boy who liked dolls and how everyone was making fun of him. And I remember really, 5 years old watching this film, I remember really taking it in of like, yeah, that is kind of stupid. Like, why can't he like dolls?
Right.
But it was really against what he was supposed to do, and everyone bullied him and he's just like, I don't know, I just kind of like dolls. And so it was pretty bad in the past, but it's still there, and research shows this, that you'll ask 2-year-old, 3-year-old humans the differences, and you'll ask them, do boys or girls, or does it not matter, who is the one who drives the car? Who is the one who is in charge? Who is the one who cooks? Who is the one who does this? And immediately, young kids will say, oh, well, that's men. Right. Boys do that. Oh, girls do that. And against all of our wishes, even if you're doing everything you could possibly do, there's still so much signaling that's happening to kids around what makes a proper boy and what makes a proper girl. And we also research this, young children, 2, 3, 4 years old, about values, not just like what's associated with boys and girls, but also like, how are you supposed to be as a boy? Yeah. And, research will show on average, kids will say, well, to be a good boy, you have to be in control. You have to be physically, I don't know the exact way that 4-year-olds would word it. And if you're a girl, then you listen well. Like there's these associations that are just like unpleasant to be thinking that to be a boy, you can't listen well. And to to be a girl, you can't assert yourself.
Right.
That kind of thing. So other toxic masculine ideas, just go through my notes. Non-emotional, this is a big thing. I've talked about this before, that when I was young, I knew as a boy I wasn't supposed to cry. Getting back to you and me crying earlier. That I went on a mission in the 6th grade that whenever I cried, I would convert it into anger. And I would literally ball up my fists and like bunch up my face in anger whenever I had an urge to cry. And I eliminated crying. I didn't cry for years because I, suppressed the tears. I suppressed sadness. I got rid of quote unquote weakness in me. And it took me my entire 20s to re-engage in crying.
Yeah. You and I have shared how, because I have very similar experience where my dad would threaten, he never beat me, but he basically threatened to hit me if I cried.
Really?
So I never, I was like, I was little, I was like, it's like, don't you cry, like that was the worst thing I could do, was cry. So yeah, I learned like, okay, there's one thing I should not do, and that's cry.
Yeah. And he's a child psychiatrist. The other idea is self-reliance. The Clint Eastwood riding off into the sunset kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, that one I didn't get. That one I did not get somehow.
Yeah.
I don't know why I didn't get that one socialized into me.
It was socialized into me.
Actually, no, I take it back. Sorry. That's not true. I actually absolutely had it fully socialized into me. It's just a different kind, meaning economic self-reliance. Yeah. I should not borrow money. I should not the one that I didn't was more like I should be able to build my own car and build my own house.
Yeah. But build your own computer.
Build my own computer.
That's true. You do that on your own.
That's true. By the way, so to poke a little bit, I don't think there's anything wrong with self-reliance being taught to humans.
No. But at what cost and when? So being self-reliant and not depending on others and not bothering others. Yeah. Like I don't know how to make my own food. I'm not self-reliant, Right. You should be able to get up and get your ass something in the fridge, But when we look at the self-reliant messages that are given to men, there are these huge effects. Men die sooner, primarily, in my mind, because of this self-reliance. You'll have a 65-year-old man who either is divorced or his spouse has died, or he's just for whatever reason not with anyone. And they don't go to the hospital. They don't call the doctor on average, and thus die a lot sooner. And they also will kill themselves from suicide a lot sooner at any age. I think the rates are something like 4 to 5 times more likely to die from suicide if you're a man. And the prevailing wisdom is that it's because men well before they become suicidal, they don't ask for help. They just stuff their feelings.
I'll tell you why. Yeah, that makes sense.
Not that women are taught to ask for help, but they're just not as taught to be shamed about it as much as men are. They're still shamed. Women are still shamed for asking for help. You know what I mean?
The thing that I find funny is the reason I was hesitating with this one is because now I'm realizing there's an opposite thing at play where I grew up that is very much still a problem. You see, women are supposed to do all the cooking, all the clothes washing, all the house cleaning, not men. I grew up in a household with my grandma and my great aunt. They did everything. And my dad, he would force me to help clean the dishes, and I hated it. So guess what? When I tried to live by myself as an adult, I was 30 and I had an apartment by myself. I didn't know what to do. I was not self-sufficient. But because of toxic masculinity, because I was not taught to be self-sufficient.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between self-reliance practically and self-reliance emotionally.
Yeah.
You're supposed to, as a man, be okay emotionally on your own.
Yeah.
I think that's the main thing.
Yeah.
The other toxic masculine idea I want to talk about is being tough. What messages were you given? I don't know if you got any.
Oh yeah, certainly.
That
was the main.
Like boys are tough.
Yeah.
Girls are weak.
That was part of my dad's thing. Like, you're not crying because you're supposed to be tough.
Right.
So yeah, absolutely.
What about at school? That kind of.
At school, all media, all books, everything was, if there's one thing that we got to do is not cry and be tough.
Right. And again, there's nothing wrong with being resilient and calling upon your inner power to get through something. But there is something wrong with always, erring on the side of quote unquote toughness instead of like sometimes saying, maybe, for example, when I played football my entire childhood and teenage years, and whenever anyone got hurt, it was, especially back then, it's not so much this way anymore because we have like science on our side, but back then, apparently we didn't. It was, you just walk it off. Yeah. And no water. That was another thing. Like,
which is so insane. What does that have to do with anything? Because
now it's all about hydrate. But when we were in the 80s, we would be doing we call them 3-a-days, 3 practices a day in August. And in Seattle, it could be 80s, 90s. And you're in the sun, playing football on full pads. Well, one practice was without pads, but, still. And you'd be dying of thirst, and they would say, water's for pussies.
So that one is, that I never experienced, and I don't begin to understand what the logic is there.
Well, because of toughness. If we're trying, the coaches, we're trying to make we're trying to make tough football players.
But understand, the way I'm understanding it is, no breathing.
Yeah, but
no breathing.
Right. But
that would only last 3 minutes.
But back then I don't know about you, but I did not grow up in a hydration aware society.
I drank very little water. Yeah. I was constantly dehydrated.
Yeah. Water was for pussies.
Like, I always wondered why my lips were always chapped.
Yeah.
I'm like, I was constantly dehydrated.
Yeah. People were passing out from
it wasn't because of that though. Like, I don't remember in Colombia, I don't remember ever there being a thing about you should not drink water. I just didn't know that I was supposed to drink water.
Yeah.
That was mainly it.
We didn't even have our own hydration like bottles. You had to go to the faucet fountain, or a hose. So
look, a lot of these things, not the water one, but the toughness, again, I think they are remnants. They're like little vestigial bits of animal and human reality that were necessary to survive in this harsh universe. But now we have other needs.
So I'll agree that part of it is that way, but what anthropologists will point to is that in hunter-gatherer societies, even today, there's a much more egalitarian, democratic system because you don't need to stratify society. Whereas once you became agricultural and then civilization, and ownership of land, and you can't have 2 people own the land. There can only be one person, and he has to pass that land to someone, that all that stuff that doesn't exist for the vast majority of our evolution. Now there has to be a hierarchy, and you can make an argument that because
the hierarchy I agree with, but the toughness is the part because like, again, just watching these people that are still living the way that people used to live, and there's a kid walks right into a honey tree to get honey, gets stung by the bees, doesn't care. They go and they're like running all day and throwing arrows and slicing up baboons, and they don't care. And you had to do that.
Yeah. Right. And for, I don't know, just me hypothesizing, tribal harmony, you can't have everyone complaining all the time.
Exactly.
Like, you've got to put your own little inconveniences aside for the greater good of the tribe. There's a job that has to be done. No one wants to go do this thing, but we all have to do our part. And so there's this notion of toughness versus being too narcissistically centered on your own pain. But when you stratify society in a civilization, and you need to differentiate between men and, it might be, this is surprising to a lot of people, but sexism and gender differences are much greater in civilized society, quote unquote, mainstream industrialized societies than they are in hunter-gatherer societies. And because it seems like, well, if we're going back in time, so to speak, it seems like there would be more gender because that's more Neanderthal, but it's the opposite. We developed patriarchy and a lot of the toxic masculine ideas. Maybe the germ, the seed was in survivability 50,000 years ago, but it morphed into what we see today because of the need for control of populations, and the need for stratification of society in order for a million people to get together, to work together, you can't rely on the normal signaling of like democracy and gender equality. There has to be this stratification so that everyone knows where they are in the hierarchy.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, when you have a situation where if you rewind the clock, it's like, I'm going to challenge people to be in charge. If people disagree, how did it used to get solved? Well, you fight. So like whoever was the toughest, I guess, gets to be in charge. Whoever killed the most people gets to be in charge, period. And most often, that was a man.
Well, it's hard to know what it was like 50,000 years ago, but when they look at tribal, hunter-gatherer societies today, groups of 50 people, and not every hunter-gatherer society is the same, but from the experts I've heard, the tendency is not towards like a physically dominant leader, that there's much more of a working together.
That's in the hunter-gatherers.
Right.
Yeah, but when they started farming and you got to decide who's going to be in charge.
Right.
It's like whoever's the killer.
Yeah, but I just find that, I thought you were saying something different, but I find it interesting myself that, because I was told this story, of what we were really like, like civilization helped bring order to chaos. That was always the idea. But in some ways you could say civilization and agriculture brought chaos to order.
Yeah, it depends how you slice it, of course. Absolutely.
Yeah. Or that in the past we were less civilized, less kind, less aware, or less cooperative, but that's actually, it's the opposite.
And the reason you barely hear of, there's Alexander the Great, there's Genghis Khan, there's all these guys. There's no TV, there's barely any books. It's because, whoever was the killer gets in charge. And then when you build a big hierarchy, sure, maybe the guy at the top can't technically, physically defeat all the people down below. But at some point, as they were rising up the ranks, they were pretty physically capable. And if someone did challenge them, they probably could kill them, or at least they would believe that they could. And after a while, now we're here in modern times, and it's not useful.
Yeah.
We're not fighting each other on horses.
Let's take a break, and we get back. Let's talk about positive masculine traits. What do you say, Berto?
Let's do it.
So, Berto, if a toxic masculine man were to convince the listeners right now who weren't patrons to become patrons, what would he sound like?
Hey, listen, all you big old pussies. You gotta do me one favor and get off your little pink high horse and go to psychologyinseattle.com and become a patron. That's patron with a P, like penis, because you gotta do it right like a man. Do it, or else I'm gonna come and kick your ass.
All right, positive traits, Berto. My definition of a positive masculine trait are masculine traits that make a positive difference. Just and you could extend that to, unsupportive of the patriarchy, you could say. And the other thing I'll say is that this is a pretty complicated area because any one of the harms that I have in my notes here as positive masculine traits could be used to harm others, as same with many of the toxic ones could possibly not be toxic at times. So I just want to say that for the beginning. I was just like the first one that I wrote in my notes was protective. That's a masculine trait, and that could be a positive thing. like rushing into a burning building to save a child, that kind of protective masculine thing. Or it could be a toxic thing where you feel like you have to control women as if they're sheep, you know what I mean? The way a shepherd protects their flock, I'm going to protect my women. So any one of these traits can be used to harm. The other thing is that it's complicated, is that none of these traits are inherently man. Any one of these things could be possessed and held true to them, self by anybody, regardless of gender. So it gets weird when you talk about positive masculine traits, because are you saying that women can't be this way? And it's like, no, absolutely not. I wonder if, because the way I was thinking about it was, as long as you're going to be quote unquote manly, can we apply your manliness for good purposes? Exactly. And that's my point, is that we have, including me, by the way, people who identify not only as men, but also as being masculine. I guess, being masculine, or I can't get away from the fact that I have impulses of masculinity. So if that is gonna happen, then, and I have expectations that are on me from other people, like if I am with my family, I have expectations on me because I'm a man, my wife expects me to do certain things because I'm a man. So it comes from within, it comes from without. And if this is the system that some of us are living within, which is totally dependent on a lot of things, then we might as well identify those positive ones and try to accentuate them and evaluate them. Yep. The other thing I'll say is that it's completely dependent on your cultural pocket. Like in our cultural pocket, Berto, being physically dominant over other men isn't exactly a huge masculine ideal. In fact, we might see those people as dullards and not smart. Whereas being intelligent and being quick-witted is extremely valued by our cultural circle. And you could argue the masculine side of that you and I ascribe to, to be entertaining, to be assertive, to be funny, to be smart, to debate well, again, that's not inherent to men, or women can't be that way, but it is a way in which I think at least I express my masculinity through. Do you do that? Yes. And I would say that if you ask me what my top positive masculinity traits are, and then you ask me what my top feminine traits are, they might be identical, or at least 99%. Yeah. So protective is one, being helpful, being potentially sacrificial within reason. What's another positive masculine trait, bro? So for me, fairness, being fair, is an important one. I think I learned that one from my dad. And again, if you ask me, is that a positive trait for women and anyone who identifies as yeah, absolutely. It's just that I'm saying, as men, we should be fair. Do you know what I mean when I say expressing my masculinity through certain behaviors and values? I think I do, because that's sort of what I'm talking about. I'm saying, like, I'll give you this example. I was at a high school dance, not recently, when I was in high school. I want to clarify. I was at a high school dance, and I heard that someone outside was jumping on cars. I walked outside to go confront the person. And I didn't do it out of, gorilla, I'm threatened by the gorilla. I did it out of a sense of fairness. That I felt was unfair to everyone. Right. So let's drill down on this a little bit, because there's other elements of, there's fairness, but there's also like, I have the right to go out there and I'm not worried about a confrontation. Right. I take control. I do what's right. I stand for principles. There's a lot of things in there other than just fairness. Oh yeah, right. But I'm thinking, like, this is an example of the motivation.
absolutely 100% for me was not, oh, territorial dispute, I love it. It was, oh, that's not fair. I'm going to see if there's anything I can do about it. Now, what's funny is, unbeknownst to me, our female basketball coach, who was this awesome dude, everyone looked up to him. He was standing at the door and saw me do this, but I didn't know this.
Wait, you said female basketball coach.
He was the coach for the female basketball team.
Oh.
He was himself not a female.
Okay.
But he saw me do this. I went up to this person who actually I think was a senior. I was a junior, and they were bigger than me. And we didn't get in a fight, but I confronted him. He came down from the car.
Why was he on the car?
Who knows? Crazy teenagers. And I said...
So this is in Tacoma?
In Tacoma. And I said, you can't do this. Like, I was like, you can't do this. This is blah, 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 right? And I knew that if it did become physical, there's a high likelihood I would get hurt. So again, I wasn't doing it because like, I'm going to prove that I'm superior. Yeah. I was doing it in a sense of fairness. I heard later, a couple of years later, actually, I heard that that guy had told someone how proud they were of me. You know, and actually it turns out he would have had my back because the teacher would have come out and be like, whatever. But I didn't know that. And so I look at that and I'm like, I learned that from my dad. Mm-hmm. And I didn't learn it from that perspective of, we are men, we go with our swords and we kill everyone. It was more of like, things should be fair.
Right. So let me ask you, and maybe you don't have an answer, but did you associate that value? And again, there's a lot more there other than fairness. There's confrontation, fearlessness, you know, principled behavior. Yeah. Did you associate that with masculinity?
I feel like I did, yes.
Okay. And did you feel, and you know, I've never really thought about it this way, that it's almost like putting on a costume, but liking it?
Well, it's because the people I admire as men would have done that.
Right. So I think that's what's so interesting about this exploration for me, doing this episode and thinking about it is like, you know, because I was thinking, okay, why do I feel like I need to identify positive masculine? Why can't I just identify positive human traits? Right. But it's because I want to be masculine. Yeah. But what is masculinity other than just a costume that, you know, a play? And I know gender experts and academics have been using similar terms for decades. You know, we play gender, that I'll hear that being talked about, and or we play, you know, the gender expression anyway. And I think 5-10 years ago, I would have been like, no, I don't want to do that. I've often, I think, because of toxic masculinity, rejected masculinity from an early age. You know, I would say like, I'm above that. Yeah. I don't ascribe in the same way I don't ascribe to a lot of American negative ideas. But a similar idea actually of, I don't ascribe to a lot of toxic American ideas, but there are positive American ideas, right, that we forget about sometimes. And I think it's a similar discourse. You know, there's an attack from liberals on American ideals or American toxicity, but what about the positive side? You know, like right. When we went to Europe in World War II, we didn't have to go there. Now you could argue, well, it's just for oil, Okay, but the individuals who went over there were fighting for freedom. They weren't fighting to invade England or France. They were fighting for French people. They were fighting for Polish people. They were fighting eventually for Jewish people. And right. and that's just one example, you know, but in the similar way for masculinity, I think I don't know how I feel about it, but sort of the end result, or this phase of my understanding, is I want to play the masculine game. I want to put on the masculine costume. That's a desire of mine. And I have to be intentional about what those things are, instead of just acting like I'm not doing that or want to do it.
Well, the socialization cuts both ways, because you and I both grew up with what we would call positive male role models as well, for example, but yet they're still genderizing things. And that's kind of why I was saying sometimes we have to decouple parts of this, because Indiana Jones, right? To me, that was a positive role model, right? He is a smart, educated man. He is not just a guy with a gun shooting people, right? He has a gun, he has a whip, but he's first of all an archaeologist, a brainy nerd, right? He happens to be good looking, but that's aside. And
happens to be white going into brown people.
Right, fine. So do you see what I'm saying? Like, there are aspects of imperialism and of sexism and things, but at the same time, the guy isn't, when he goes and fights these people, he's not the buffest, he's not the best. He tries really hard and he's okay getting hurt as long as it's for the right cause, right? Like this kind of thing.
And he can admit when he's afraid.
And he's exactly.
Snakes.
So he had
Why did it have to be snakes?
A lot of positive masculinity traits, but it's still socialization. It's still teaching me that there are some things that are more male than others, right? Okay, now I'd say I would take that. I'll take that, because I'd rather have those traits than the really bad traits. Because the worst thing he did related to women was that he had left Marion unexpectedly or suddenly when she was young and they had sex or they were romantically involved, right? But we don't see him hitting her or demeaning her because she's a woman or something. Now, there are inherent sexualized things in that movie, or sexist things in that movie because of the time. Okay, so that's an example. Another example would be like when I think of James Bond. We've talked about James Bond. James Bond is one of the most sexist, in the early movies especially, like hits women, all these things, like terrible, right? Now, as the movies progress, or maybe if you put that awful thing aside for a second, there are some positive things, right? Again, the guy uses smarts, and he is like on the side of fairness, and he's on the side of right, and he does, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And whereas a lot of the people that he goes up against are very toxic. They're doing all these things. They're abusing people. They're, all these things.
Right. And so I want to delineate that, because as I was, thinking about this and looking particularly on the internet, I want to delineate, for obvious reasons, toxic behavior and toxic masculine behavior.
Right.
Because we can look at, like, I was looking at TV characters that people think are toxic masculine, and they were pointing at like Ramsay Bolton or Joffrey Baratheon or something. And it's like, yeah, those characters on Game of Thrones did terrible things, but was it clear that they were ascribing to a toxic masculine ideal, and that was influencing why they were doing those things? You can have terrible people that are doing terrible things, but they're not at least noticeably motivated by trying to be masculine.
Which is ironic, because one of the people I listed, you asked me to make a list, was Tywin Lannister.
Okay.
Because to me, he kind of epitomizes I'm the man.
Right.
I'm going to be in charge.
All right. Well, that's interesting. We'll get into that, because I have a lot of opinions about Tywin Lannister.
Now, I haven't read the book, right? So I'm just going by the show.
It's similar. It's very similar. But anyway, my point is that when we're talking about toxic masculinity, we're not just talking about anything that a man does that's bad. We're talking about when men, and it's hard, of course, to know, are playing the role of a man, what parts of those behaviors are harmful to others. Anyway, so it's funny how we can't stick in the positive zone. We always got to go to the negative. Berto, another positive masculine trait.
So another one that's going to be itchy and scratchy: honesty.
Yeah.
I think this idea, like, and recently in the last few years, honesty has gone out the window, right? But I think that honesty is a mask, and I'm not saying it's only for males, absolutely not. I'm just saying, when I think of males that I admire, they're honest people.
Yeah. What's an example of this?
So Mr. Rogers, or take in the movies, like It's a Wonderful Life, right? Like, he's honest. These people are honest actors. They are truthful. Now, I'm not saying they never like ever told a lie or something. It's more about like their whole demeanor is oriented towards honesty and openness.
Honesty in the face of disapproval?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They don't care if they will be like ostracized, if they will go bankrupt, whatever. They're going to say what's real. Like in It's a Wonderful Life, he goes up to Mr. Potter and he's offered the world. And he's got to be honest and true to himself and to Mr. Potter and to everyone, saying, no, I can't. And that is nearly his ruin.
For you, if you were to, and when you exhibit that, do you connect that? Because for me, it's like, am I just being a human right now? Am I being an American right now? Or am I, or at least in part, am I identifying right now with a man as I do this thing? You know what I'm saying?
That's another one of the ones that I got from my dad. So I do identify it as a positive male thing.
But, and so when you are honest,
yeah,
and you're being that style of honest, do you feel like in retrospect you're being masculine, like you're that's a way you're in a self-satisfaction way, that you're meeting your own need to express your masculinity through that honesty?
Yeah.
Okay. Because you know what I mean? It's kind of a weird distinction, because...
Well, it is related to the whole machismo thing. That's what I'm saying. It's all indoctrination no matter how you slice it. But I am being macho by being honest.
Okay, that's a good way to put it. It's like, if that feels congruent, I am being macho by being that, I am being manly by doing X, Y, and Z, then I think you're in a zone of expressing masculinity. And then you want to ask yourself, is it toxic or positive?
Exactly. And that's where I land is, look, let's say I can't fully escape the fact that I am part of society and I have genes, right? I can't escape these things. But then if I were to choose, or if I could choose, would I rather have traits that include honesty, integrity, blah, 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 like all these things? Or would I rather be, abusive and harassing and right?
Yeah.
And so granted, I am indoctrinated no matter what, but I would much rather have these traits.
Right. What's another positive trait?
Okay, so I will say strength.
Physical strength?
Physical and part of the toughness, but... How do I say this? Because we just said it was a potential negative, right?
Can be, yeah.
It can be. But I have always thought of like, you know what? This is a tough problem. I'm going to get through this. I did this last year as I've been struggling with health issues. I did it when I had trouble like passing tests or things.
Let's drill down on the health issues. What positive and toxic masculine influences were on that process?
We've talked about
asking for help.
Yeah, we talked about some of this where like I realized I caught myself being in the hospital at one point and like, oh wow, I haven't told anyone I'm here, and I'm not asking for any support emotionally, and that's definitely not a good
right. So, just so people know, Berto had his thyroid, or most of his thyroid, removed because he has some disease called Graves' disease.
Yeah, Graves.
That was misdiagnosed as all sorts of things for a long time, and he was suffering a lot from fluctuating hormones. Anyway, all sorts of problems. And you were in the hospital prior to knowing you had Graves' disease.
Prior to that, yeah.
And you talked about it it's so weird. We did an episode on health anxiety in March of 2020.
Yeah.
As the pandemic, yes. And we talked a bit about COVID, but I cut it out because by the time the episode came out, our discussion was so out of date, even though it was just a couple weeks earlier. But anyway, and you had gone to the hospital, and I had gone to the hospital with a allergic reaction.
Yeah.
And we vowed at some point, I think before I went to the hospital.
Because neither of us told each other when we were in the hospital, or that we had until after the fact.
Right. It's like, and
by the way, I was in the ER.
Yeah. And we're close enough to each other and see each other enough that I remember saying to you, I think I was the one who initiated it, that said, look, dude, like, let's make a pact. Yeah. Like, you will text me or call me just let me know you're in the hospital, and when you're in the hospital, you want support, and you're just sitting there in a bed.
Well, no, but that's just it. I didn't want support. I didn't think of wanting support because of the bad parts of this.
Right.
And
it's weak.
I was embarrassed to be in the hospital. I didn't want anyone to know, and I certainly didn't want support.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. But at the very least, it's interesting.
Yeah. But so, and by the way, because it wasn't like, well, you got to call me. It's not like I called some other friend.
Yeah.
I didn't tell anyone.
Yeah.
And so I'm sitting there feeling so lonely
Yeah.
and not doing anything about it.
Right. Now, can women feel the same way? 100%. We give everyone, at least in our society, a lot of shame about relying on others, for sure. But men are just given it, 50% more, let's say.
But then on the positive side, again, being fully aware that this is still indoctrination, blah, blah. But on the positive side, I felt like I was able to rely on a part that I admire about myself and about my dad and about some role models that are male. That is, okay,
I'm going to do this.
Winston Churchill this thing.
Yeah.
Gonna get through this. And it sucks because, yeah, you're right. Like, women can't get, like, of course, like, that's not the point. But if you ask me, what are some of the, that's one of them. Yeah. And it's a difference from I'm strong because I can go and beat every other man up, right? It's I'm strong because I can get through really difficult situations.
Yeah.
Or I'm gonna give it my best, right?
Right. Superman doesn't just say, wow, this is tough, I give up.
Right.
Yeah. What's another positive trait?
I'd say, okay, so now we're getting a little bit more into the gender part. I'd say kindness to women. Let me put it that way. Kindness to women. And that one is one that I didn't get a complete picture growing up on. So again, growing up in Colombia is weird because it is a very sexist society, and my dad in particular was fairly sexist. But I also grew up with two grandmas in the house and another grandma nearby, and actually lots of female influences, aunts, cousins, female cousins. So I got two sides of this coin, and I feel like I got good and bad. So for me, I did learn some amount of kindness, like kindness to females.
As a masculine trait.
As a masculine trait.
Yeah.
Because I was the male cousin to my female cousin who was a little younger than me, and I could be a good role model, right? And protector, and also just even but not even the protector part. Actually, the friendly part, the I'm nice to you part. I listen. We share actual real life together. And that to me is an important thing. So if you're going to be a boyfriend, a husband, and you want to be a strong male and be indoctrinated in a positive way, it's like, be friendly. Mm-hmm. Be nice.
What's another positive trait?
Okay, I'd say it's kind of along these lines. Be curious about pleasuring your mate. So as opposed to like, well, I'm going to get off because I'm the male and I got it. So that's the negative one. Mm-hmm. The positive would be like, I'm going to make sure you have a fun time.
Yeah, that is an aspect of masculinity that you'll see of like that guy, or women will talk about a man like, ooh, he knows his way around a woman's body.
And this one's a little conflicted for me because honestly, part of it I think stems from some of the abuse I suffered as a child in that, I was sort of like the TLDR was at 5. I was so everyone warning, but at 5 I was sexually abused by a 12-year-old female babysitter. So part of what I learned was, I'm supposed to pleasure and I'm not supposed to get pleasure, right? So those are the negative aspects. The flip side is as I've matured, had therapy, all these things, right? I actually really do care in a more positive way nowadays about I'm here for you, but I will also have fun. It's just that I'm here for you. And I think that that's a positive thing. Mm-hmm. Just a tricky one personally.
What's another positive trait?
I think, okay, so how about this one? This one's relevant. Conservatorship, or how do you call it? Curating, caring for. So we have a planet, we have a society, we have a city, we have a house. I think a positive male trait that I didn't learn, this is one that I sorely lack, is caring for and being clean and really like making the environment good. And I say that because I lived in a house that was in disrepair. My dad, unfortunately, didn't have a repairman's bone in his body. I grew up not knowing how to fix anything. And if something was broken, it would just stay broken and get worse, right? And then I look at our planet, and that's what's happening. So imagine if we use this indoctrination, but used it to say, you know what, as strong males and females, but in this case, we're males, as strong males, we're going to lead by example. We're going to take good care of these places.
Yeah, I will sometimes dip into this, and I get mixed reactions. Like, again, it'd be nice if we just said, look, as good humans, you should take care of the planet.
Yeah.
But since a lot of people, including us, are at least in part motivated by trying to be a good blank, then you might as well tap into that.
Yeah.
And, what's wrong with it, really, as long as you're being positive? Because I'll do this with Americans. Also, liberals will sometimes just try to distance themselves from America or American pride altogether, which I get. But on the other hand, a lot of people, especially people on the right, identify strongly as Americans. So if we allow the right to define what Americans are or what American culture is, then they are driving the bus. But if we liberals participate in the American narrative, which we used to, because I remember in the 70s and 80s, like especially in the 70s, a big part of what America meant was acceptance and listening and helping and not being the bad guy, Now, we were just in Vietnam, but I think it was, in response to that, you had a bunch of baby boomer hippies emerging into power in the 70s and 80s. Some of it went well, some of it didn't, but they were all, I just remember growing up with a lot of Americanism being, I remember being very proud to be an American. At 4th of July, I had a flag, and I remember believing in freedom, not the conservative version of freedom, but like freedom for everyone, freedom for people in Russia to be religious or not, freedom for you to be Jewish, freedom for you to be a feminist, like freedom. That's what freedom meant to me.
I think you just triggered a realization, and I think you've already arrived there, but I think I'm just arriving, is that there is an analogy here, there's a parallel between jingoism and masculinity or femininity or whatever you want, right, in that these things cut multiple ways and you can use them for good or bad.
Right. And to just throw the whole thing out.
Yeah, exactly. It's first of all not doable because you can't just unprogram all of us overnight or something like that, right?
No. But if you don't participate in the programming, then...
Right. So if you said, look, all of a sudden, none of us is going to have any national pride of any sort and about nothing.
Which would kind of make sense.
Right. But how do you do that?
But that's not going to happen.
But imagine if we did have national pride about positive things.
Right.
Instead of like, we have the biggest nukes and the biggest guns.
But that's what I'm saying. I do. I don't know if that just makes me an old person or something. But to me, to be an American means respecting boundaries and participating. We invented the UN.
Yeah.
Americans hosted the United Nations. It was our idea, I think.
Those are the values, right?
I don't know if it was an American idea, but it's still there. And it was an idea of like, we are going to work together.
Yeah.
Environmentalism was, you could argue, was a large part in, sort of developed in the early part of the 20th century.
Well, it's like, okay, even whether we
in the United States, Americans believe in this stuff.
Scientific inquiry, such an American value.
Scientific vaccines, we as Americans in World War II, which is maybe the last time we ever did anything good, I don't know, we worked together and we all sacrificed, people recycled their tin for the government. The women worked in the factories, the men went overseas. Everyone did their part together, and we didn't think of our own, it didn't matter what political side you were on. We were Americans first. We were doing a job for the betterment of humanity first, and anything else was secondary to that. And that is American to me. Yep. I've kind of dipped into that on the podcast every now and then. But anyway, so if you want to be a man out there and you want to live a man, you don't have to, of any gender. You want to be masculine if that's your gig, if that's the costume you wear, the mask you wear, if you will, then lean into it and define for yourself what masculinity means, because it inspires. I don't know about you, Berto, but when I think about positive masculinity and I really kind of step into that space, it inspires me to do good.
Absolutely. Another example for me is I used to feel that expertism, being an expert, was one of those masculine things that I looked at. And now I think of it in a more subtle way, because I think that is actually leans into a negative one. Because there's this, first of all, experts are a problem. In almost every case you look at it, it's like whenever someone's an expert, right? And let alone that men are usually the experts, right? But there's a different one, and one that I struggle with, which is discipline. So I would rather say that I want that discipline, because the discipline is what gets you to get better and better and better and kind of keep going with something, right? So I don't have to be labeled an expert. I just want to be disciplined.
Yeah.
So like there's examples of that where all these aspects, if you look at them, you can find a positive way to frame something. And it becomes really hard for someone to say, hey, your actions have been leading people astray because they're honest, they have integrity, they're disciplined, they care for the planet, they care for each other. That's a hard case to make.
Yeah, totally. Anyone, regardless of gender, men included, should be allowed to express their identity as long as it doesn't harm others, and especially if it enhances the world.
Right.
Other positive masculine traits that I came up with are being knowledgeable. For example, being knowledgeable about toxic masculinity. Again, not that women can't be knowledgeable, or a feminine trait can involve, being knowledgeable. But when I think of myself, masculinity is expressed through, like around the house.
Yep.
I'm the one who knows everything about the fuse box and about the electricity in this house. And right. Stacy doesn't know anything about it. And I'm guessing, I'm pretty sure she wants me to know everything about it, because then she doesn't have to know anything about it. And I like knowing things about it. And it feels masculine. And I'm guessing that for Stacy, it feels good to have a man who knows about that sort of thing, Right. And that's a masculine thing. There's all sorts of things that I now, could Stacy have learned in the same way that I learned?
Yeah.
Yeah. But when I was, 20 years old or something, I leaned into all sorts of technical house things
right.
to learn, and so that's an expression of my masculinity. And as long as I'm not telling Stacy she can't know things, and mansplaining all over the place, then I'm useful,
Exactly.
Stacy looks to me as like, he's useful my husband as a man is useful.
Right. Again, it sounds like I'm apologizing, and in a way I am, but I'm imagining this, like someone's like charging you and reading you your crimes because you were being sexualized. You were being male, right? It's like, Kirk, you've been too male because you've been, fixing things around the house, and you've been polite, and and then you list a whole bunch of things that are useful and helpful, right? Instead of like, oh yeah, you told your woman that she couldn't touch this, and you
right.
told it, like, if the things that you net out with are positive,
yeah,
then it's okay.
And it's particular, right? Because if Stacy were different and she
right.
didn't want me to dominate in
right.
that area, and I forced it, then that would be toxic.
Right.
Even though I'm doing the same exact thing, it's completely context dependent.
Well, it's funny. Even like if you and I live together, right? We'd have our own version of this as two males, because likely I might take over a lot more of the computer duties.
Yeah.
And you might take over more of the fuse box duties.
Yeah.
But we're still
I take over everything except for the computer duties. My understanding is nothing about anything in the home.
But see, through this discussion, I'm realizing that to embrace my positive masculine traits,
sure,
I should have more of a inquisitive mind about my environment.
Yeah. You take care of the dudes jumping on our car in the front yard.
Exactly.
And
I'm the muscle.
It's funny to think about what sort of chores would divvy. You probably end up being the cook. Can you cook at all?
I can cook. I just don't know if you want to eat what I cook.
Oh.
I love what I cook,
Yeah.
but I love it.
Okay. Well, so I think you'd end up being the cook, because I'm like very far from even developing initial skills of cooking.
Chores that I can do. Yeah.
I like cleaning the bathroom.
Oh, okay. You can have that one. I am screwed because, again, I didn't lift a muscle growing up, except
Neither did I.
doing dishes. Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Neither did I.
You
Okay.
had to develop it.
So one, my parents spoiled me in all sorts of ways, and
okay,
were
so
very
you
nice.
did have that.
Two, I had two older siblings who did so many chores.
Got it.
And I the only thing I had to do was take out the garbage, which was kind of like once a day. And it was literally like 20 yards of walking, you know? It was from the bathroom just getting, you know, or from the kitchen
Right.
walking out to the garage.
Did you say you had to do that in like pitch dark?
Yeah. Well, I had to bring the cans to the top of the road, which was pitch dark. Like there in, you know, where we grew up, there were no street lights. And if the moon wasn't out, like, and it's so stupid. Like, why didn't I bring a flashlight?
And wasn't there, did you tell me a story one time you heard something and you had to run back?
Oh yeah, that would happen regularly.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd be walking back, and I couldn't see anything. I'd be walking by feel of the ground, because like our driveway was fully trees
Sure.
and bushes. So even if there was light coming in, it
Were
wasn't.
you taking that as a male challenge?
You know, I just think back then, we just didn't think about how to use tools. Like, I don't remember having umbrellas.
You didn't have a cell phone.
Right, you didn't have cell phone. I don't know why I didn't bring a flashlight. It
Right.
would have been so much easier, but I think in my family, maybe it was just like, it just didn't occur to people to like have a system, you know, like now I'm all about systems. Like
Right.
I've got these super bright flashlights for, you know, this upcoming winter when we walk the dogs. And anyway, other positive masculine traits: being useful, helpful. Kind of went over that. Being courageous. Like in my house, I get the spiders. I think you might get the spiders.
Yeah,
in your
actually,
house.
so let's talk about that one. I was traumatized when I was 5. I was traumatized a lot at 5. I woke up. I was having this dream where in my dream I was trapped in a web. I was trapped by a gigantic spider, and I was really scared in my dream.
Had you watched Lord of the Rings?
No, not back then. Well, maybe. I know it's probably more like the Godzilla movies on Sundays or something. Anyways, trapped in this giant spider web. And I woke up like sweating, and I was on my pillow, and right next to my head, there was a spider. Now, I'm sure this spider was no tarantula, but as a 5-year-old waking up from such a dream and seeing a spider, I freaked out. And my dad thought it was like someone trying to break in. It was like a whole mess. But that left me kind of like scared of spiders. Years go by into my adulthood, and me and Mitch, you know, we used to be roommates, you know, Mitch. We'd be sitting there.
Well, short asterisk. Beyond that spider, were there a lot of spiders in your house?
No.
Yeah, because you lived in the city.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then me and Mitch were sitting there, and then like one of those big like Washington spiders would go by, and we'd like, and both
Washington
of us,
spiders aren't even that big. You know what I mean?
well, they can get like those
compared to what I've seen,
or whatever. They're not tarantulas, but
also like anyway, around
Yeah.
the world I see much bigger spiders.
yeah,
you know?
but still, in
They're- we
Bogota,
can
I didn't
have-
see any spiders like this.
Right.
And so I see this, and we're both like, we can't do it. And for years, I was scared of spiders. One day, I'm at a party. So talk about positive male attributes here. I'm at a party, and I'm talking to a girl. And as we're talking...
Were you flirting?
I was flirting. And as we're talking, she goes, a spider. And I look over, and there's a spider. And something clicked in my primate brain.
Masculinity.
I grabbed a glass and I said, oh, no worries. And without fear, I put it over the spider, grabbed paper, put it there, took it outside. And from there on, I was cured.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely masculine. Because say you were there with a woman that you weren't flirting with, or a woman that you were...
My grandma. I would be like, spider.
Yeah. But like your masculinity kicked in.
Like, oh, don't worry. I got this.
Yeah. So for me, spiders, side note, I grew up in the woods in Sammamish, Washington, which is near Seattle, and spiders and bugs were everywhere.
Yeah.
I walked to school through a trail in the woods.
Yeah.
Slugs were everywhere. Mosquitoes were everywhere. I would wake up in bed, and my bedroom was in the basement,
Right.
and I would wake up with, I one time woke up with a centipede walking across my chest.
Oh my gosh.
And I just grabbed the centipede and threw it. Like it was bothersome, but it wasn't like,
right.
So to me, bugs
This was a thing.
Bugs. Yeah. I don't really, I don't care.
Yeah. Similarly, my brother, he was visiting when he was a kid. He was visiting a different part of Colombia, and one of the cousins there who grew up in this like very jungly area, they're walking. They see a snake, and my brother's freaking out. And the cousin just calmly, without saying anything, grabs his machete and grabs the snake with the machete and like kills it essentially. And he was younger than my brother, and so it's like one of those like if you grow up with it,
right. But yeah, so other courageous things that anyone of any gender can do, but if you're expressing your masculinity and it inspires you, is, like going to a protest, pushing back on certain things in society that could, hurt you on,
right.
that are for good. Crying in public is another courageous thing to do. Another positive male thing is male bonding. Like 4 dudes playing StarCraft together every day.
That's right.
Just to inform the listeners out there, Berto and I, for 2 or 3 weeks now, have been playing with Berto's brother and this other guy, an old friend of yours from work, right? The 4 of us have been playing StarCraft 2 against the computer co-op.
Yep.
Sometimes twice a day.
Yep.
Like out of nowhere, all of a sudden we've been playing StarCraft 2 like all the time.
It's because first of all, you and I talked about doing this years ago.
Oh, we did.
And we never did it, but we talked about it. And then my brother, because I've had 3 bouts of StarCraft 2. When it first came out, then some time went by, then again, and then now.
Yeah, I think me too.
My brother and I have been playing for a while. Like I even bought him a computer so we could play Age of Empires and StarCraft 2.
Wait, recently?
No, I bought him a computer 2 years ago. So like this is not even new for us. And
wait, you bought him a computer because his computer isn't
he
fast?
had only a laptop, it couldn't do it and stuff. So for Christmas, I bought him a small. It was a small computer, but it was like just enough so we could play.
Oh, okay.
And recently we had stepped it up, and we were doing lots of StarCraft 2. And then you and I were talking. And I'm like, oh, we should play. And then it's been great because you could do 4-on-4 against the AI. And,
yeah. So that's male bonding, Funny. So Berto, I don't know the answer to this question. The other day, your friend had his sister
sister, right? Yeah.
Join us on the because we chat
the Discord.
On, we chat. We have a voice line where we're talking as we're playing, and did that change the dynamic between our male bonding?
It did. I had to show off.
Do you think it did?
I don't know. I definitely was. Is it coincidence that I played one of the best games I've played? Like I was not misclicking. I was like so focused. Was I trying to show off? Maybe.
I mean, I think it changed the dynamic, because when it's just the 4 of us guys, it feels safer.
Yeah.
And not to make sexist jokes or anything.
No. Because we are actually not like that.
Yeah. But it just feels, I don't know. I just feel, I just think that it's a
part of it was just that there was a spectator.
Yeah.
But I do have to recognize I didn't feel it in the moment, but after the game, I felt like I was trying to show off a little bit.
Right.
Because I was like, I got those guys.
Yeah. I don't know. I can't know if this is what it was motivated by, but I found myself wisecracking a little bit more, trying to make her laugh.
Right.
Which is like,
it's so hilarious because we don't know this person.
Right.
It's a voice. She barely said anything.
Yeah.
But we're automatically like, oh yeah, we gotta perform.
Yeah. And so there's some negative sides of that and some just neutral sides. But I think just talking about the male bonding is that, and of course women can bond and anyone of any gender can bond. But I will say that I have had a number of experiences where I know, or I can assume that okay, we're 5 dudes and we don't know each other that well, or I don't know some of these dudes, but I can kind of bank on you having a similar value of male bonding, of working together and harmony and getting along and doing something fun together. And I've had that experience many, many times in my life, you know, of expressing my masculinity through male friendship.
And through positive things, because again, these things cut both ways, because we and many people male bond in negative ways too, in toxic ways as well.
Yeah. Just some other random things, you know, being funny. Of course, women can be funny and women are funny. In fact, all the comedy books that I've bought, that I've liked were by women. Amy Schumer, Amy Poehler, Lauren Graham, Lindy West. And the one comedy book that I bought by a man I was really meh about, which is Jerry Seinfeld's most recent comedy book. It was just like, it was tone deaf a couple times. I was like,
what is he trying to, is it trying to teach you to be funny, or just talking about his experiences?
A lot of what comedians will do when they write a book is it'll be like part memoir, like kind of like part long form stand-up routine. You know what I mean? Like you could imagine them telling a story on stage and making everyone laugh. And it's sort of like that. But also he has like, he fills the book with all these little quips that because he's kind of a short joke stand-up comic, you know?
Very, yeah.
And so he has all these ideas that he's written in a book, and so he just kind of says them. Anyway. I think that I feel like I can express my masculinity, particularly in groups.
Through humor.
Another is heroic behavior, you know, like in a extreme example, like disarming a mass shooter, for example. Right. I could imagine... like actually when I was a kid, I would daydream about protecting our school from like a mass shooter. Like I would sacrifice myself, you know. When I was a kid, I remember in war movies, the good guy, like the really courageous guy, would jump on the grenade. Do you remember this scene?
Yeah.
You know, a live grenade lands in the foxhole, and the courageous, manly guy kills himself to save his buddies. Right. And now, of course, you know, we don't have to take it that far, but heroic behavior, like, I don't know, like, I don't want to go into specifics, but I will say as a professor, there are times when I see students who are being mistreated by the university, or at least it seems that way. Right. They're being mistreated by my colleagues, I think. And I don't know if I frame it as heroism, but that I feel masculine stepping in strong, tall, with my chin up and saying, you can't do that to this student. Yeah, so this is the mirror of what I was talking about, fairness. Like my box for it is this term fairness. You're calling it heroism, but I think there's like aspects of it. But I totally sympathize with that, because it's this idea of like, wait a minute, this can't stand. Right. And so, sure, in some case, in the extreme case, it might be like, wait, it's not right that this person is coming and shooting us, so I'm going to go, yeah, but that's the extreme. But the more common case is like, well, you shouldn't be able to talk to them like that. Yeah. I'm going to step in. Right. And but yeah. And the way that I'm framing it as heroism is that, like I said, I'm standing tall. And I'm standing proud, and I don't need to do this. Like this doesn't impact me at all. Yeah. But I see someone in distress, and I run into the burning fire, and I might even get singed, you know. But it's like, that's what I feel like strong men do. That's, you know, what we got to do. Yeah. Loyalty, honor. Again, these things can go both ways. Leadership, providing for others, being a fun dad. You know, being a good father, I think, is another positive, obviously positive masculine thing. So let's read some things on the internet. This episode is going to be long, Berto. It already is long. I'm just going to read a couple. because I just want to give people the landscape that we live in, because I'm guessing a lot of you listening right now are like nodding your head to maybe, I hope, a lot of this of just like, the general notion of feminism and toxic masculinity. But on Twitter, an American conservative radio host, of which I won't name because I don't want to give him any kind of plug, said the following: when you wage war on toxic masculinity, you create a society where a woman can get raped on a train in Philadelphia for 40 minutes and not a single man will stand up and do something about it. This was tweeted by a famous American conservative radio host. When you wage war on toxic masculinity, you create a society where a woman can get raped on a train in Philadelphia for 40 minutes and not a single man will stand up and do something about it. Berto, what do you think?
Yeah, it's just a fundamental misunderstanding of what we are talking about.
Right.
We just spent all this time saying like, hey, there's all these positive male traits.
Right.
And look, in the episode that no one will hear, where you and I got into a debate, one of the points was, if someone came and was aggressive and you were there, would you stand up and try to like do something about it? And there's the dark side of it, which is, I'm male, I must puff my chest. And then there's this, what I'd hope is the lighter side that we're talking about, which is, let's be fair, let's be just, let's stand up for the underdog, let's stand up for the oppressed, all these things. So this example, like, any one of us that is on this side of the movement that would say, like, the rape is one of the worst examples of toxicity.
Right.
That's the first thing we would jump onto.
Right.
And so what I don't understand is, I do understand, because I see where their crazy logic is going. They're saying, look, because you're pushing this agenda, you're going to make boys into girls.
Which is
and
like,
when
what?
They're in that train, those boys are going to be too afraid and feminized, so they're not going to stand up to the rapist.
Right.
Right. And what they're misunderstanding is that we are mostly, at least us, I can't speak for everyone, we are trying to trade traits.
Yeah.
I'll accept this, like a trade-in program. Come in, bring in your harassment, I'll give you this justice.
Yeah.
And so it's like, in that case, like, no, of course, we'd be like the first ones to step in.
Yeah. And I would argue that traditional masculinity had a lot of positive things in it that have become, to some extent, more toxic. I mean, of course, there was toxic masculinity in the past, but I don't know. I just feel like I remember men being men, like in real life, not in movies and TV, and they were actually not harmful or unfair to other people as often as I think the conservatives would like to think we're supposed to be. You know what I'm saying?
I think so. I will say this too. So they set up a straw man argument anyways, right? Like, but let's take a different question. So if you don't oppose toxic masculinity and you're in a boardroom late at night, there's two men and a woman, and one man starts groping the woman, and the woman seems sort of into it, but seems uncomfortable. What should happen? Because this isn't rape on a bus or anything. It's just late at night. Guys would be guys. She seems sort of into it. They're drinking. It's fine. That's what we're talking about. This is where, when we're having these conversations, we'd say, like, no, the other guy should say, hey, this is not okay. That's being a strong male in that case.
Right.
What is being toxic is being like, hey, what's up? It's fine. She was sort of into it. I mean, she was drunk, but who cares?
Or looking the other way. Yeah.
Because boys will be boys.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about.
Right.
So you're pretending like...
I just had something fall off my something. Anyway.
You're pretending, not you, this conservative person is pretending like, oh, they're always rushing into boardrooms late at night and stopping harassment.
Right. Right. So first off, what happened was there was a rape in Philadelphia, and it was on a train, and the conservative discourse was that no one did anything because it fits their narrative, which is that men are becoming women, as if women wouldn't step in, by the way. And two, that people in cities like Philadelphia are immoral.
Right,
That's
right,
their narrative. It's like city folk Democrats have no morals. They're baby killers or whatever the F. But that isn't what happened. It's not like a bunch of soy boys were cowering in the corner of the train. When you read the actual story, it's not like there were a bunch of feminist men like afraid to step in. It was a rape did occur. Hardly anyone knew it was happening because it wasn't very noticeable to other people, that kind of thing. And I think people did do things about it. You know what I mean? So anyway,
I think the picture they have in their mind is, and by the way, was the rapist a soy boy?
Right.
No. Let's clarify this picture. The rapist is an alpha male giving it to this woman who should take it, and he's pointing to all the beta cucks going, what? You can't do anything about it because you've been feminized. Right. Wait, so is that good?
Right. Yeah.
Is the alpha male cool in that situation?
Right. And even if it's just a straw man because they have a political agenda.
Because let me take it the other way. Let's say they said, no, the rapist is also a beta cuck. Oh, well then, shouldn't the other beta cucks just outnumber the one beta cuck?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so just kind of rattling off some of the results of toxic. We've gone into a lot, but research has shown that sexual assault on others is a effect of toxic masculinity. Essentially what they look at is they ask people about their attitudes, and the more toxic masculine attitudes they ascribe to, and they also will measure criminal activity or blah, 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 and find that people with more toxic masculine values are more likely to sexually assault and rape other people. Mm-hmm. Also, it's been found that this has an effect on our self-esteem as men because, we're not ripped with a six-pack or, penis shaming happens a lot. All sorts of things that men will be shamed for, and they'll develop body issues. They might use steroids, eating disorders. Men can suffer from, absolutely, feeling like they're not a real man because, if you're short, say you're 5'2", and you're, 140 or 130 pounds or something, and you'll be seen as like not a real man sometimes, and it's like, what?
Yeah.
Like, come on. So we could see how there'd be, self-esteem issues. Also, as I was saying earlier, men don't seek help. They die earlier, more suicides, among other sorts of effects. Mental health, they seek mental health much less often. Denial of needs, attachment needs, emotional needs, cuddling needs, care from others, medical needs. Also, violence and crime. So, Berto, actually, let me tell a story about violence and crime and toxic masculinity that anthropologists, sociologists will point this out as well, is that when you take a group of people, like a population, and that identifies as something, and you disenfranchise them, in society, then they're more likely to ascribe to toxic masculinity, and they're more likely to want to establish them, because if you feel like society sees you as lesser, and you and your people are being oppressed, and you and your people are being depowered, and you're losing out on the goodies of life, you're seen as a loser. And one fast track to self-esteem is hypermasculinity.
Yeah.
I will become so masculine and so clearly a better man than even those in power,
right?
Then at least I can have some self-esteem. And the road to hypermasculinity is paved with toxic masculinity.
Right.
It's violence, it's rape, it's non-emotionality. It's really not asking for help, right?
Yep.
So when I would treat, families back in the day, I would treat a lot of gang members, a lot of teenager and young adult girls and boys in gangs. And I found it was so different from the way I grew up, because I came from suburbia. I was like completely just divorced from my understanding. Like, why would you, I understand wanting to have friends for sure, but having guns and shooting people up and for what, because the public discourse is like, well, they're in gangs because of drug dealing. And certainly that can be a thing. But a lot of the people I treated who were in gangs, they were in gangs for bonding and for hypermasculine, for trying to establish some kind of self-esteem in a world that saw them as nothing. You know, they were going to, with violence and crime and their own sense of freedom, like not going to school, establish themselves as worthy human beings in their own world. And the upper gang echelon would prey upon young people who were looking for that sort of thing. Anyway, so one story, I was treating this one kid, a Mexican immigrant family, and he was smart and funny and interesting. And when we would have sessions, he just seemed like just a regular, sweet 15-year-old kid. But, he would talk about how he was in a gang, and he's like, well, all the other Mexican immigrant boys are in gangs in Seattle, and that's just how it is. It's just, you gotta play the game. And then one day I get a call that he got shot at the mall, actually Northgate Mall.
Oh my gosh.
And my next session with him, he's talking to me. He's like, I got a couple bullets through the legs, and it caught an artery, and I was bleeding out. And I had to have all these surgeries, and my calf muscle is all messed up, and I don't want to be in gangs anymore. That was awful. And so this is when he started really opening up in therapy, and I'm like, well, what happened? And, so he's telling me, he's like, well, we're at the mall, and we had heard that this other gang it wasn't even really a gang. A lot of the gangs in Seattle anyway were what they called them crews, and it was just like 8 people, and it wasn't like a part of like the Crips, you know what I mean? It was like just 8 kids who glommed together in this gang, violent,
they just
criminal.
had a makeshift gang.
Yeah. And maybe it would get passed down through generations. I don't know. But anyway, so he's telling me about his crew was in a fight with another crew, and someone had heard that someone called someone like a bad name, like an a-hole or something. Man. And they're all at Northgate Mall. And so, there was some sort of this is before Twitter. So it's some sort of intermediary, like maybe some friend of a friend says, well, they said so-and-so said you're an a-hole. And they are, well, those guys are a bunch of bitches. And then that gets back to them. It escalates over the span of a few hours at the mall to the point where the other gang gets in their car, gets all their guns and drives by the food court, which all of them are in, and just shoots into the food court. Just into the crowd.
Into the Northgate Mall.
Oh
my God.
My client gets hit and almost dies, goes to the hospital, and I was like, I don't want to be in a gang anymore. And it occurred to me, because in my head, from the movies like New Jack City or whatever, Colors, a lot of the gang activity, it seemed more important. Like the things that you got in fights about, they seemed like...
They're trying to steal our territory.
Yeah, like economic. And certainly that can happen. But I heard... this was and maybe it was just the gang members I talked to, but every single time there was a beef... It was essentially just the same bullshit you find.
He said, she said.
Yeah, at school. Like, you have a rivalry with or someone talk crap about you. And the difference is with most people, they don't shoot. They just continue to talk crap about the other person. Maybe you'll get into a fist fight, but with these gangs, it immediately turned to death and destruction. And so he's telling me about all this, and I was like, wow, all of that just for your own toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
All of that, and he knew going into it, like, well, he's like, as we were escalating, this isn't his words, but he knew that someone could die.
Yeah.
And I'm like, at what point did you not just pull the plug and go home?
Yeah.
Who cares what those other douchebags are saying about you? It's not worth it. He's like, but I didn't want to be a bitch.
Yeah.
And it's like, we indoctrinate our children into that mindset, of do not be a bitch. And just that word, right? Bitch. It's like, it's a
Yeah.
woman, right? Like you as a guy, it's like, you don't want to be a woman.
You don't want to be a woman who has to sell her body for money.
Yeah. So it was astounding to me. And so many examples of how masculinity will lead to crime, essentially, and destruction and death. And so and also research shows that men with toxic masculine attitudes are much more likely to commit intimate partner violence, which makes total sense. In fact, when I treated DV perpetrators, about, I don't know, a third of what I was doing for the perpetrators was educating them about toxic masculinity, about male entitlement. A big part of DV perpetrator motivation is, I'm the man. It's like, let's change that narrative. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't give you the right to beat her, and it doesn't mean you're supposed to, and it's okay to say that she hurt your feelings. You don't have to punch her in the face to tell her that she hurt your feelings,
I just had a realization, which is obvious, but the worst insults in English and Spanish that you can do to a guy, right?
Yeah.
You are a son of a bitch.
Right.
Like, the worst thing I can say about you is that your mom is a bitch.
Right.
It's like not about you, it's about your mom. It's got to be about the mom, the female.
Yeah.
Like, it's crazy.
Yeah, when you really pay attention to even just like playful ribbing that guys will do. Like, a coach would walk in to the locker room and say, "Hey, ladies, settle down," or when they're trying to motivate us, it's like, "Are you women or are you men?"
Yeah.
Don't be a woman, don't be a girl out there, be a man. It's just like, why does it have to be framed that way?
Like it's unbelievable. Like, is there one insult, like, you shithead maybe, but nothing is as strong as you motherfucker.
Yeah.
You son of a bitch. Like, the insult I can levy towards you has something to do with a woman.
Yeah.
That either you're doing something bad to, or they did something and now they have you.
Right.
It's so crazy.
Right. So, men account for what percentage of homicides?
In the States, 70%?
Yeah, U.S. 90.
90%.
What percentage of those arrested with forcible rape are men?
With forcible rape, 85%.
99.
99%.
Percentage arrested for embezzlement?
80%.
51.
Okay.
So that's not apparently influenced by masculinity, because it's like 50-50.
Earlier, that's why I was saying that, like, as humans, I think we're all taught that we should win at all costs.
Percentage of those arrested for offenses against family and children?
Family and children? 60?
80.
80.
Research has found that, and so they came up with all these percentages based on some speculation, but and data. But anyway, if we get rid of toxic masculinity, we could reduce what percentage of sexual violence?
Oh, maybe cut it in half.
More than 69%, according to these people. Percentage of traffic accidents?
Road rage. Maybe how much we can get rid of?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we get rid of 50%.
Yeah, 41%. Along those lines, when I was younger, a teenage, when I was 16, I first got my license. I'm not sure if this is where it came from, but it could have. A manifestation of my toxic masculinity was driving like dangerously.
Yeah.
With people in the car.
Yeah. I
with
this.
people not in the car, and then I would tell people about it.
Yeah, I remember this was a thing.
Yeah. And I almost killed me and my friends a couple times by playing like chicken essentially, or just speeding through a red light. I
mean, Footloose has a whole scene where they're playing chicken.
Yeah. Yeah. And a real man is not afraid of that.
Which, by the way, this is why Back to the Future is one of my favorite series. We talk about positive male role models.
Yeah.
So he's a great guy, and what does he do? He has friends. He's friends with a scientist. He travels through time. But what does he not do? he steps in to help, but he also doesn't have to take the bait.
Right.
And he's like, are you going to race me and be dangerous? No, actually I'm not.
Yeah. So just rattling off a whole bunch of other things I came up with that are, there's so many negative things that are a result of toxic masculinity, but obviously you have misogyny and sexism and the incels and the MGTOWs, and men are more likely to go to prison actually because of motivated by masculinity. Depression is higher for men, or a lot of depression can be caused by masculinity. Stress, substance abuse. A lot of men will, suppress their feelings through substance abuse. Poor social functioning, mansplaining, manspreading. That's another thing. Right? Spreading COVID, for example. This is anecdotal. That at the beginning of the pandemic, I had this group of what I'm going to call former friends who almost right away were like, well, we're going to still get together, right? In our, 15 men group thing. Because, I'm not worried about it. I'm not afraid, that.
And if I get sick, so be it.
Right. And I wasn't like that.
Right.
Let's just put it that way. And I was like, yeah, I'm not going. That's just not going to happen. And they ended up canceling it in the end, but it seemed highly motivated by this masculine show of I'm not afraid of COVID. It's like, it's not a matter of fear. It's a matter of respect of, I'm not, you could, fine. I'm not, you could say you're never afraid, but a bullet to the head is still a bad thing. You know what I mean? So, sexism in the workplace, you could say Elliot Rodger, and a lot of those people are a result of toxic masculinity.
By the way, I used to get made fun of this all the time by friends that for I didn't want to eat the carbonized part of the chicken or whatever it was. It's like, oh, come on. Stop being such a,
pussy.
Yeah. Also, I've been demonized for the kinds of drinks I order. If I drink a foo-foo drink with a little umbrella and very citrusy.
I'll never do that. I'll never make fun of you for that. but also, I see people making fun of you for that. I'm just like, really?
Yeah.
Like the fact that there are man drinks and women drinks. So that's another thing. Like I love white wine. I don't love white wine, but in my later years, I like white wine more than red wine. And right. When I go to the restaurant, me and Stacy, and we order drinks and I order white wine, they'll put the white wine in front of my wife because
you're not supposed to be drinking wine.
But how dumb is that?
Well, and here's
white
the thing.
Wine is just green grapes. That's all that it is. It's not. Why is there male and women wine?
Yeah. So you were asking about what are some positive male traits, and actually, to me, one of the ones that I'm proud of myself, and that I take pride in, and I see it and when I see it in men, I think that's admirable, is in not feeling emasculated or threatened in my masculinity for trivial, stupid stuff.
Yeah, you've got to be really insecure as a man to feel like your entire masculinity is dismantled by ordering a Cosmo at the bar.
And I've gotten such pleasure. This has happened to me many times in my life, where I show up at the party. I remember one time I showed up at the party with a kind of a pinkish lavender shirt and a purple boa, and at first, a couple guys are trying to make fun of me, and then I feed right into. I'm like, yeah, that's right, and they're so puzzled that they can't make me feel feminized for it. And then all the girls love it, and they're like, wait, what's happening? And then I'm like, yeah, that's the way it goes. And I love it because I'm like, look, you dolts.
Yeah,
that's not male. That doesn't make me a male or female. I'm just wearing funny stuff because I love it, or I'm drinking this foo-foo drink because it tastes delicious to me, or I'm standing on the stage and singing a karaoke song because I love singing.
Right.
And
that's funny to think back.
By it.
Yeah, that's funny to think back. Karaoke was a female thing.
Oh yeah,
years ago.
Except in the Asian community, no, but in the normal. Sorry, that's not right. In the popular American community, it was definitely seen as a.
If you were a macho guy, you wouldn't
get up there. And hate
crimes against LGBTQ people, a result of toxic masculinity, rape culture. We did a whole episode on that. Homophobia, gang violence, wars, you could say. I mean, you could argue a good percentage of world wars or even small wars are at least influenced by toxic masculinity of like, I will not be dominated and I will dominate.
Yeah, it's certainly, that's a huge component.
Yeah. Let's go quickly over our top 5 toxic masculine characters. Berto, very quickly, number 5.
All right, so from movies and TVs, my number 5 is Biff Tannen from
that's my number 3.
Back to the Future.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, he's a cartoon character, but actually not far from the truth, right? The guy's hyper masculine, big, buff, probably plays football, whatever, right?
Bullies.
And then bullies, and basically tries to rape the woman.
Yeah. I mean, you could argue he did rape her without.
I mean,
without
he was
going,
and he was expecting that this was within his purview. Like,
right.
Yeah. Number 4, Patrick Bateman.
Oh, okay.
Patrick Bateman represents so many aspects of this because he is like in Wall Street, and you know, it's like morality is not for the powerful man.
From which movie is this?
American Psycho.
Yeah.
And then number 3, this is my Tywin Lannister.
Yeah.
So I debated with myself. I certainly thought, well, no, I mean, to me, I don't want to just mention like a monster because that's just maybe a psychopath or something.
Right.
You know, I thought Tywin Lannister is like represents that, like, I'm the man, I'm in charge, my lineage will be in charge, not the woman, she'll be like married to someone, but my lineage will be in charge. It's all about my male heir and all these things. And of course, it wasn't just him.
No.
But he's one of like the worst examples of it in that sense. And I wanted him because in fact he doesn't come off as a monster necessarily, like in the context of the world in which they live in.
Yeah, he was totally normal.
Right. And yet that is where we come from.
And going off of my fear-based motivation in the books, we know that Tywin grew up in a family with a father who was considered weak by society, and there were rival houses, lesser houses. You know, Lannister goes way back. You know, and there were rival minor houses who were legitimately threatening the Lannister house. You know, overthrowing and taking over Casterly Rock and all that stuff. And little Tywin was watching his father get less and less power, and then and learned that in order to be safe and to keep your family safe and your legacy safe, which is a big deal to people during feudal times in the aristocracy, you have to create fear. Yeah. That's the only thing that will keep you in power, because if people are afraid of you, they won't threaten you.
And so there's that, and the fact that he couldn't form emotional bonds with his children, especially not the ones that were most disappointing. Yeah. And that was his demise. Right. All right. Number 2, Baron Harkonnen from the Dune series. Baron Harkonnen is like, again, one of these examples. Sure, he might also be a psychopath, but I like that in this movie, he is presented less of a psychopath than in the David Lynch movie. Yeah. By the way, I've been listening to the book on tape.
Is it good?
It is really good. And actually, I'm surprised.
Is it easy to follow? Because I was worrying about
it. It is. Oh, okay. At least so far. But I'm actually surprised how close both the Lynch and this movie actually are to the story. Oh. Now, up until now. And I'm at the point where Paul and his mom are in the desert right now. Okay. But anyways, Baron Harkonnen, this like male, and he values like the male strength, his male lineage, and everyone must be oppressed. And
in the book,
same thing. Like
in the book,
fear.
Does he rape boys like he did in the Lynch version?
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. But I think that's something they took out of this one because that is a trope that I think they were probably trying to not emphasize, which is if you're the bad guy, of course you're going to be a homosexual probably.
Well, and in the Lynch version, Harkonnens were gingers.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah. Okay. Anyways, my number 1.
Which I'm saying is another trope.
Yeah, it's another trope.
Like redheads are evil.
Is evil, and he's homosexual. Yeah. Because in the book, Oh no, that actually they do mention boys, so I guess you would say he's kind of a pedophile too. But okay. Number 1, Chad.
So wait.
You do so much. You stomp on my number ones.
Harkonnen is gay and a pedophile, or just a pedophile?
They allude to the youths. That youth is so beautiful. I don't know how young they are. And I don't know what
does he ever
rules
involve
they have in that universe.
Does he ever get involved with an adult?
The only thing they mention in the book so far is, oh, that youth is really beautiful. And in fact, he's kind of in love with Fader, who's like his nephew.
Okay.
And but it's unclear how old or young these. But they had a boy slave that they had captured somewhere. We don't know how old he is, but he was like, bring him, and this time drug him. I'm in no mood for a fight.
Wow.
See what I'm saying?
So
it's like,
so we don't know how old they are.
No, but he's at the very least raping and abusing these slaves. So,
and they're younger. And...
Yeah. Now, that part, fine, villainize him. I think, though, there was this aspect of like, oh, and he's gay.
Right.
All right. Number 1, Chad from In the Company of Men. In the Company of Men is a Neil LaBute movie. And
I haven't seen that in a long time.
It's Aaron Eckhart.
Yeah.
And this should be framed. Everyone should watch this. It's the epitome of the toxic masculinity in the more real terms that we deal with it.
Right.
This guy is a stud, and his friend is kind of nerdy, and he just like is a horrible human being.
Yeah.
Sexist, everything. It's just horrible.
Uses women.
Absolutely.
Wants Topher to use women.
And with the males, he is manipulative and insulting and conniving.
Yeah. So
and traitorous.
So what's different about him just being a toxic person is that a lot of his motivations could be argued, we don't know, are expressions of masculinity. He's trying to assert himself as a manly person, and in the effort of that, he is harming all sorts of people around him.
And I'm surprised, was the term Chad already in existence way long ago?
When you said that, I'm like, I wonder if that's where Chad came from.
That's so crazy.
Yeah.
Because he's the
But I don't think so. Because I think that gives those people, because incels,
too much credit.
I think he gives them too much credit. Okay. Yeah. Because I think Chad, it just sounds, it's like when in the 80s we would have said like Chip, like what dudes who were named Kip or Chip were rich white blonde guys. You know what I mean? I'm pretty sure that's not true, but that was our stereotype. All right, my list, number 5, toxic masculine. This is kind of a hard one for me to admit, but the Mandalorian.
Right. Yes.
So in the beginning, toward the end, he makes up for it, but in the beginning, he's non-emotional.
That's right.
Hides his face, works alone, doesn't like to talk, doesn't care about his bounties, doesn't think about the moralities. He's just here to do a job. By the end, obviously, he becomes a human being, which I think is, part of the whole point of the show.
Yep.
Number 4 is Dennis Reynolds from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Oh, yeah, I forgot.
Played by Glenn Howerton. One of the things that I've realized in recent years is that when I first started watching It's Always Sunny in when would that have been when it first came out?
2005 or something?
Okay. Yeah, when I first started watching it, I thought Charlie Day was the runaway star. I thought he was the funniest person. I thought I saw Mac and Dennis as like
sideshow,
sort of like a support cast for Charlie Day's character. The more I watched of the show, the more I considered Dennis to be the star.
Dennis is awesome,
and Mac and Charlie are there to support his comedy. I mean, Dennis is a hilarious character.
He is so good. Yeah. I wouldn't go as far as you're going, but I wouldn't be upset that you're going that far.
At the very least, I demote Charlie's character to secondary.
Sure, he's not primary. You cannot call him primary.
To Dennis and Mac at the very least, yeah. So Dennis, he manipulates women. He uses women for sex. He needs to be in control. He acts non-emotional. He doesn't listen to people. He drinks a lot, that kind of. Okay.
And they treat D. He treats D.
Right. Always
his sister.
As a man, Frank, all the boys treat D terribly, as a way of signaling to each other, we're men and she's a woman. Number 3, Biff, Back to the Future. Number 2, Tony Soprano.
Yep.
Tony Soprano, homophobic, or at least he acted homophobic to prove that he's a real man. He's very tough, lacks compassion, treats his wife poorly, cheats on her a lot without any kind of remorse about it, not emotional, but he went to therapy.
Well, and it's funny because like there's a case where there are some aspects that he shows that he has potential to not always be so toxic, right? There are moments where he tries to be an okay father, or moments where he tries to be an okay husband. It's just that the other traits end up winning almost every time.
Yeah. Number 1, and I love that I came up with this, the Fonz from Happy Days.
Interesting. No, I can't allow it, but I see where you're going with it.
Especially in the beginning of the run, the Fonz was super cool. That was his whole thing.
Yeah.
Which basically means no emotions. Not only no fear or pain, but also no like excitement. You know, like the true masculine Clint Eastwood character just doesn't ever have an emotion either way. You know, it doesn't get excited, doesn't get sad, doesn't get afraid. It's just kind of like always just cool.
But if you're gonna understand that the Mandalorian evolved, the Fonz evolved.
Fonz totally evolved. I mean, by the end of the run, he was dressed in I don't know what you call it, like a blazer. He was a teacher. He was, you know.
And there were so many episodes where he was, some of these things we were talking about, standing up for the underdog, all these kinds of things.
True.
He was doing that.
But listen to he could not apologize.
And that's true, yeah.
There were many scenes where he's supposed to apologize. It was a huge played for laugh thing. He couldn't, you know, I'm guessing most of you out there are too young to remember Happy Days, but the Fonz would go, he's supposed to say, I'm sorry. And then everyone would laugh.
But then okay, and you're right. But they are showing in that he's got a defect.
Yeah.
Because you're supposed to be able to.
But then listen to this.
Yeah.
Always, especially in the beginning, had 2 voiceless, hot
women
ladies
I know, yeah.
on each arm.
And he would snap.
And they'd run to him.
Yeah.
He could fix anything with a punch.
I know, yes.
He could intimidate anyone just by looking at them. You know, there were so many toxic masculine ideals wrapped up in the Fonz.
I won't disagree. Yeah. But I will disagree.
Positive masculine characters.
Okay. Number 5, Rocky Balboa.
Interesting.
So you think, oh, what? He's like a meathead punching dude, and he's a bodyguard for like the mob or something.
Yeah.
He's a collector. Okay, hear me out. Yeah, he's a strong guy from a blue-collar neighborhood. He doesn't have money and stuff. But guess what? The guy values friendship. He's nothing if not honest. He is a man of his word, and he is so good to his woman, you know? And he's respectful to her, and he stands up for Polly, who's abusive. You know, it stands up to Polly and stuff like that. Anyways, so Rocky to me reflects a lot of positive male attributes in a strong package.
Interesting.
Number 4, Gomez from Addams Family. Gomez is like great because he loves Morticia and he treats her awesome. Like he's so respectful, and it's not. They're equals. They dance together. They have fun together. She's super smart as well. Like they're both very educated.
So you know, the Addams Family emerged in the 60s, I think.
Yes, I think so.
And
maybe in 50s.
You know, the Munsters, it was a similar kind of thing. And of course, these shows were just, you know, cartoon versions of American values, right?
But
was it part of the abomination of this family that he wasn't like Mr. Cleaver and Leave It to Beaver? You know what I mean? Like, what was it like? Oh my God! Look how weird this family is. I mean, the father is being so doting on his wife. I mean, what kind of man is like that to us?
It could be. I think it's a show way ahead of its time because look, I like the Munsters, but the Munsters used the antithesis of what was actually happening, which was the same thing the Flintstones did and the Simpsons did, which was the man is an idiot.
Right. And the wife is really
brilliant.
Really the one in charge.
And it was like, well, no, that's not good either. Like, you're going too far the other direction. Yeah. And the reason you're doing it and getting away with it, and it's funny, is because the reality is horrifically in the other direction, that the man is controlling and abusive and the woman doesn't, all these things. Okay. But the Addams family...
And it excuses bad male behavior.
Exactly. But the Addams family was completely different. And you're right. Maybe it's part of the genius that's the horror. But like, they were a good couple, a healthy couple.
Yeah.
Okay. And actually, this is continued because recently they've put out these cartoon versions, and I watched both the first one and the second one. And again, they're a great couple. It's really positive. Okay, number 3. Ready for the controversy bells? Bill Cosby from The Cosby Show.
Okay. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean,
what's his name?
Huxtable.
Cliff Huxtable. I should clarify.
Yeah.
Because I didn't remember his name. So it's Cliff Huxtable in The Cosby Show. Yeah.
The fact that it's played by Bill Cosby is irrelevant.
Yeah.
The character was written, and
actually I would even go for...
There's some toxic elements though, because if you watch that show, there's some sexist things.
I don't doubt it. It's a product of its age, absolutely. Yeah. But in the age, right? You know, several things like a person of color. I hate that term. Sorry. A person who is not the standard Caucasian, right, is sitting there as a successful doctor, head of a family, good father, good husband, right? All these things. And yes, there are things of the era that were bad. And I'll actually go further to say that the tragedy of the whole Cosby story is that even in other things like Fat Albert and all these things, he portrayed so many of these good, positive male values. So it's just like incredibly tragic and ironic the way it all ended up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Number 2, Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers, to me...
Well, so that's interesting because for me, when I was coming up with this list, and you could argue for it, but I was like, I don't want to just have a list of 5 good men. I want to have a list of men that are obviously exhibiting masculinity. You know what I mean? But in a positive way. You could make an argument that Mr. Rogers did.
And that's what I'm doing. But it is a little controversial because you would say, what are you talking about? He's like singing a little song and he takes his foofy little shoes off.
I mean, I wouldn't say he's exhibiting femininity. I'm just saying that it's not like obviously masculine, you know?
I'll tell you why, for me, it was masculine and it was positive.
I mean, I like that.
Right,
I wish that, and I do associate a lot of the things that Fred Rogers exhibited to be masculine, like being caring, being loving, listening, being soft.
But there's other aspects that I think you'll see what I'm talking about. Because I watch this stuff so closely. Some episodes, something breaks in the house. And he goes and he takes it down and he explores it. And he's like, oh, I see what happened. And he shows you how he fixes it. Mm-hmm. Another case, there's a problem in the neighborhood of make-believe. And he goes and he talks to them and he helps them mediate.
Okay. Right?
Another time, one of his neighbors has this problem. And he goes and visits with her and listens. And it's like, it's not just the obvious things. There's these things that he is being that male member of the community, helping, being helpful, being maybe mansplaining, but not in a mansplaining way, right? Like he's helping.
Yeah.
And so I looked at that and there are things that I don't necessarily have that I wish I had.
Yeah.
You know?
When he would go to locations, he was in control, but not dominant.
Yeah.
He was assertive, but he listened.
Right.
You know, he was very strong, but not, constantly insecurely trying to assert his dominance.
And knowing that he was in reality, he was like in the army or the Marines or something, you know. Anyways, he was a man's man. You know? Okay. And lastly, number 1, Superman.
Oh my God, that's my number 1.
Talk to me about it.
Well, so mine is Christopher Reeve's Superman. Particularly.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, because
that's what I mean.
The way it's been portrayed by the other Henry Cavill, is fine, but there's not a lot of personality there.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about Christopher. Well, I'm talking about the archetype and specifically the Christopher Reeve Superman.
Right, the archetype. You know, the 50s TV show.
Yeah.
But particularly Christopher Reeves, though, because he's a true hero.
Yep.
No macho posturing.
Nope.
He was courteous and helpful and humble.
Yep.
Even when he was Superman, not just as the wimpy Clark Kent, but as Superman, he, was kind and the epitome of the positive masculinity is he's in Lex Luthor's pool with a necklace of kryptonite around his neck, and he shouts out to Mrs. Tessmacher, Lex Luthor's assistant. He asks a woman for help, and he's begging her. He's just like, please help me, help me. And he's defensive, and he didn't need to posture against. He didn't. Nope. As soon as she takes the thing off, he doesn't go like, get out of my way. He's just like, thanks, and I've got to go. And he doesn't brag. He always tells the truth. He doesn't try to use aggression,
And this goes with your positive jingoistic message earlier. Truth, justice, and the American way.
Right. That's what Superman exhibited. Helping get the cat out of the tree, getting the criminal. This is the American way.
Yes.
Would Superman march for Black Lives Matter? Of
course.
You bet he would. You know what I mean?
Of course.
And so Christopher Reeves, Superman, number one, most positive, and you cannot deny.
You can't.
That dude's masculine.
That dude is masculine. Also, I was upset with Superman 2, even as a child, because they do something that actually hurts this thing we're talking about. In Superman 2, he loses his powers for a while, remember?
Yeah. And
he's in that cafe, and then this bully is trying to bully him or someone, and he tries to stand up, and he gets beat up because he's not Superman, and he's unfortunately over-relied on his strength. He doesn't actually know how to fight, and he gets beat up. Okay, fine. I was, as a child, somewhat disappointed that Clark Kent didn't at least try, but fine. But there's no character arc, because later in the movie, it is when he's regained his powers that he comes back and he deals with that. Mm-hmm. And I wish that it would have been a different angle. Like, he realizes that he doesn't need the strength to deal with a bully situation like that, right? So I was always disappointed by that. But it's a small point. Superman 1, Superman, Christopher Reeves, that's the key.
Yeah. My list, number 5 is Chiron from Moonlight. So the main character, we see him as a kid, as a teen, and then as an adult. And the whole movie is about masculinity, and it really touched me deeply when I saw it. I remember just walking out of the theater just completely altered.
Yeah, so good.
And then we had the Oscar party, of course.
And I won.
Yeah. So just a little story of this. So if people remember, so I have an Oscar party every year, and everyone at the party tries to guess who's going to win, and whoever gets the most points wins the prize. And so it all came down to this last: if La La Land won, then Taron won. Yep. And if Moonlight won, then you won.
And I win, right?
And when they announced when what's his face read the card,
La La Land.
He said La La Land, and then they took that back and they gave it to Moonlight. And I have it all on camera. It's pretty funny. But anyway, so awesome. And it was a big moment at the party, is the point. It's like everyone, half the room was like, oh my God. And then all of a sudden, boom, whole other thing. Anyway,
big upset.
Yeah. So Chiron is courageous against massive homophobia. He is emotional, expresses pain. He survives. He stays true to himself as a gay man through thick and thin, against massive oppression and violence. Allows himself to be himself in the end, forgives his mother, seeks physical warmth from Kevin, is sensitive in a courageous way. So Chiron, Moonlight. Number 4 is Henry Fonda's character in 12 Angry Men.
Ironically, the Fonz, Henry Fonda.
So Henry Fonda's character, if you haven't seen 12, I recently rewatched 12 Angry Men. It holds up. It is so good. basically Henry Fonda. So 12 jurors, they watch this trial, and it's a person of color, by the way, a brown person being accused of murder. They go into the deliberation room, and everyone's like, "Oh, he's guilty." Of course, okay. I don't really know, but who cares? Let's just say he's guilty and go home. And Henry Fonda's character's like,
wait a minute.
I don't think so. And so he drags everything to a stop.
Yeah.
And he stands up. He doesn't get aggressive. People get aggressive with him.
Yeah.
He doesn't insult people.
And it'd be so much easier for him to just shut up and go with it.
Yeah. Or to lose his shit and just yell at people. Yeah. He's principled. He's methodical. He's thoughtful. He's courageous. He's principled, intelligent, not arrogant. He doesn't give in to peer pressure. He's a leader by example, and eventually he convinced the entire room, all 12, to agree with him. Spoiler alert. Number 3, Aragorn from Lord of the Rings. Among several other characters in Lord of the Rings. Yeah, totally. Aragorn is heroic. He's not macho in the movies anyway. In the books, you could argue he's a little macho, but in the movies, played by Viggo Mortensen.
That's true. He is very much not needing the spotlight.
Yeah, and he's not. He doesn't need to be dominant over women. No. Arwen, goes to save Frodo, and Aragorn is like, "Well, wait," and she's like, "No, I gotta go," and he's like, "Oh," he's like, "Yeah, okay." You could argue that's a little toxic, but at the same time, it's like he cares about her. He doesn't want her to get hurt. A more toxic dude to be like, "No, I'm gonna go," that kind of thing. But Arwen has more power than he does. Yeah. I think he understands that. Stands by his word, self-sacrificial, shows his emotions. Number 2 is Sean in Good Will Hunting, played by Robin Williams.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Good one.
Because this is interesting, because on one hand, you're just like, well, is that really super masculine? But if you watch the movie, it's written and Robin Williams plays it this way. He's pretty masculine. He's very masculine. He's kind of a tough macho guy.
In fact, it borderlines with that gray area when he tries to choke his patient out.
Yeah. Because Will, played by Matt Damon, is like pushing his buttons.
Yeah.
And Sean is, he's just like, "Fuck you. You're not going to do that." You know what I mean? And physically stops him from doing. But he encourages emotions. He's helpful. He's a good mentor. He's wise.
Yeah.
He's thoughtful. He listens well. He can kind of bro down with Will a little bit with story stuff. So, and then my number 1 is Superman. But I thought that was kind of fun to come up with, like,
it was 5
positive masculine characters, and so we can hold up Mr. Rogers, Superman, Aragorn, Sean from Good Will Hunting, and the others, and we can say F you to early Fonz, Biff, and Tony Soprano and others.
Yeah.
And everyone out there, please take care of yourself, because
you deserve it.